Chapter 958. After seeing so many fish, to be honest, Jiang Hai was very tempted. It was impossible for him to say that he didn't want these things. But the problem was that he could ask for them, but how much was a problem? Perhaps for others, these things couldn't be raised casually. After all, the water quality, the size of the fish, the distribution, and so on had to be considered. But Jiang Hai didn't need to do these things. What he needed to do was to simply put these fish into the sea, as long as the density wasn't too high. So after looking at Edward Anderson, Jiang Hai whispered to him. Indeed, this was a very troublesome thing, but fortunately, Edward Anderson was still quite experienced. According to the current distribution and number of fish in our fish farm, if we buy fry, the upper limit should be 12 million big fish and 80 million small fish. You can figure out the specifics. After thinking for a while, Edward Anderson said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also thought about it. The so-called big fish were fish that could grow more than 1 meter long, such as the long-fin tuna and the dragonfly. If Jiang Hai wanted to raise codfish, this thing would also be a big fish. As for the other fish, they were all small fish. After all, whether it was the eastern star spot, the white pomfret, the silver snowfish, or the rat spot, these fish could only grow 1 kilogram at most, 2 kilograms at most. Such fish were naturally small fish in the sea. After all, even the Atlantic codfish could grow 200 kilograms in weight and more than 2 meters long, not to mention the more muscular tuna. 12 million big fish and 80 million small fish. Well, Iron Bull. After calculating in his heart, this was the upper limit that the fish farm could bear. Naturally, Jiang Hai couldn't buy fish according to the upper limit, so after thinking about it, he could raise fish according to 3/4 saturation. So after planning, Jiang Hai looked at Antoine. Hearing that Jiang Hai was almost done with his plan, Antoine asked Jiang Hai with a smile, "Hey, Mr. Jiang, tell me. I want 4 million longfin tuna this year, 2 million longfin tuna, and 2 million Atlantic salmon. Do you have any way to get other tuna species?" Looking at Antoine in front of him, Jiang Hai decided on the big fish first. It's probably a bit difficult. You also know that this kind of thing swims around. There are only a few tuna farms in the world. Even if there are, it is estimated that there won't be many. After thinking about it, Antoine thought about it and said to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai thought for a moment after listening to Antoine's words. These are all things that he needed. Get whatever you can. Blackfin is fine. Of course, the best would be yellowfin, big eye, masu, and chingon. Southern bluefin would be good too. If you can really get it, I will give you the upper limit of 1 million fish, and you could do whatever you want with the rest. Looking at Antoine, Jiang Hai said seriously, and Antoine thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. Tuna is extremely expensive even if they are sold as fry. Other fry are sold by the ton, such as cod fry and the like, but tuna fry are sold by the tail. One tail is $6, and 1 million is $6 million. He can get at least $500,000 from this. No one will refuse money, right? So he nodded to show that he understood. Jiang Hai then turned his attention to the little fish. The growth time of tuna was very slow. It would take almost 5 years for them to mature. Even if Jiang Hai's fishing ground was nourished with spiritual energy, it would still be the same. His spiritual energy could only make these animals grow bigger, but it couldn't make them reach the mature stage directly. Therefore, these 5 years were a must. But after raising them, a longfin tuna weighs almost 40 kilograms. Jiang Hai sells them for $100 per kilogram, and one fish is $40,000. 4 million fish is $40 billion. Of course, this money has to be spread evenly over 5 years. But even so, these fish are worth nearly $8 billion a year. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is a huge sum of money. And the most important thing is that he raises them every year, and only in the first 5 years, there will be no harvest. After 5 years, his fish will be endless. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai's heart was still a little excited. With the addition of longzhu and salmon, these fish will be harvested every year, and Jiang Hai's fishery will only become stronger and stronger. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson's hand couldn't help but tremble. Jiang Hai calculated the price, and so did he. If Jiang Hai really raises these fish, the annual income will be more than $50 billion after 5 years. 2/1000 is $100 million, and $100 million will be divided among the 8 of them. Gulp. Just thinking about it, he felt his throat tighten. It's too scary. And this is just the big fish. What about the small fish? These small fish, 80 million. Well, let's get the white pomfret first. We'll be more assured about that. 30 million white pomfret, 10 million silver cod, 10 million rat spots, and 10 million eastern star spots. That's it. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai waved his hand. It's better to try to raise them first, because these fish are not fish species of the Atlantic Ocean, but of the Pacific Ocean. Jiang Hai actually wasn't too sure whether they would be suitable for his place. Okay, no problem. I'll definitely pick the best for you. I'll give you another 2 million haddock. Hearing Jiang Hai's order, Antoine couldn't help but smile in excitement. He had made a lot of money from this deal. At present, not counting the last 1 million tuna seedlings, just the ones ordered by Jiang Hai. A fry of albacore tuna was $6, a tail of anchovy was $1.15, and a tail of 4-year-old salmon was $5. These big fish added up to $46. $3 million, and Antoine could at least make a small profit out of it. Jiang Hai was a person who never put money on the line. He believed in real gold and silver transactions. Therefore, there was no such thing as empty-handed. If someone came to him to buy beef, he would have beef. So long as they brought the money, he would deliver the goods. What mortgage? What high price after selling the beef? Jiang Hai did not need it. He would not give anyone face, he was just that firm. So when he bought things from others, he would simply give them money. It was that simple. Antoine could pay off his bank loan with the money he earned from these larvae alone. Of course, Americans did not have the habit of paying off their loans in one go. It was more likely that he would use the money to expand his larvae farm. The price of the small fish was actually higher. After all, the fish Jiang Hai wanted were not ordinary fish. The white pomfret was cheap, almost the same price as the American redfish. Because Jiang Hai counted by the tail, Antoine gave him a discount of 18 cents per fish, so 30 million fish was a total of 5 for $1 million. However, the other 3 kinds of fish were a little more expensive. He bought the silver cod from Russia, and it sold for $2 per fish. A silver cod could grow to about 1 meter, with a maximum of 120 centimeters. Of course, it was impossible for it to grow to that size, but it could grow to 80 centimeters. At that time, it would weigh more than 10 kilograms. 1 kilogram was $60, so a dozen kilograms would cost nearly $1,000. It was not bad. The mouse spot was similar to the grouper. It could grow up to half a meter long, and 5 kilograms was the limit. Jiang Hai estimated that it wouldn't be a big problem. A fry was $5, the same as a 4-year-old salmon. However, Jiang Hai could raise about 3 kilograms a year. 1 kilogram of Jiang Hai was $140, so 3 kilograms would be $420. If one fish was already so expensive, what else was there to say? 10 million fish would be $2 billion. The money from these fish alone was equivalent to 2/3 of the total income of Jiang Hai's fish farm this year. The Eastern Star Spot was a little more expensive, although there were farmed ones. Even the small seedlings of this fish cost $15 per tail. Of course, this price included the shipping cost. Otherwise, the fish wouldn't be sold at such a high price. The white pomfret was $5 for $1 million. The mouse spot was $50 million, and the Eastern Star Spot was $150 million. The price of $15 per fish was indeed a bit high. The small fish were worth a total of $254 million, and the big fish were worth more than $25,000. Zhang Zian calculated in his heart. Fortunately, he didn't have to pay all this money in one go. Otherwise, he would feel a little heartache. After he paid the deposit and signed the contract, the price of the fish was almost settled. Then, Jiang Hai prepared to get some shrimp, lobsters, and king crabs. There was no market for abalones and sea cucumbers in the United States. Jiang Hai couldn't even finish these things in the sea, so there was no need to farm them. By the way, Mr. Jiang, I heard that you like shrimps. Are you interested in these shrimps? As soon as he mentioned these shellfish, Antoine suddenly patted his head and asked Jiang Hai excitedly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with some confusion. He opened two specially heated net boxes in the distance and fished out two things from them. Jiang Hai knew these two things. They were big shrimps and shrimp crawlers, which were also mantis shrimps. But the question was, why were these two things so big? In Jiang Hai's opinion, the biggest shrimps in the past, besides lobsters, were the Argentinian red shrimps that appeared inexplicably in his manner. But compared with the big shrimps and mantis shrimps in front of him, the Argentinian red shrimps were nothing, because at this time, the two things in front of him were almost half a meter long, almost as long as his forearm. Were they shrimps? Are you sure he didn't eat some radioactive substance and mutated? Were they kidding? Mr. Jiang, are you interested in these two things? Looking at Jiang Hai's dazed appearance, Antoine couldn't help but laugh. To be honest, when he first saw the two giant beasts, he was also stunned. Then he had a feeling that Jiang Hai would be interested. Gulp, tell me. Looking at the two things in front of him, Jiang Hai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and whispered. Chapter 959. How do we eat this prawn? Looking at the several big prawns in the basin, Chia couldn't help but scratch her head and whisper to Jiang Hai, who was sitting next to her. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smacked his lips. To be honest, he didn't know, because the prawn in front of him seemed to be a bit too big. I think we should just cook it and eat it directly. Seeing Jiang Hai and Qi Jie's somewhat troublesome look, Qi Jie, who was sitting next to them, couldn't help but say indifferently. Hearing what she said, many people who felt a little troublesome nodded their heads. But if we cook it directly, it feels a bit wasteful. But it's not that no one objected, at least after AI Xiaoxi thought about it. She said to her. After hearing AI Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Cooking it is indeed a bit wasteful. How about this? Let's boil 2 prawns, steam 2 prawns with minced garlic, and roast 2 prawns. Listening to different opinions, Chia thought for a moment and said with a smile, since they haven't decided how to cook it, then let's try it out. Hey, I think this is reliable. Hearing Chia's words, Feng Yunxin also smacked her palm and said with a smile, okay, then let's do it. After seeing that there was an opinion, Aphrodite also smiled and picked up the basin in front of her and walked toward the kitchen, and Jiang Hai and the others also walked over, wanting to see if this thing is easy to cook. The thing that Jiang Hai brought back is not someone else. It is a prawn, a big prawn, but how big is this prawn? Not counting the pincers, it is 40 centimeters long. Indeed, this is a very scary prawn. If it is straightened, it is not even shorter than a human forearm. This kind of prawn was called lobster, and it was the largest known prawn. Antoine knew that Jiang Hai liked to eat prawns, so when he was looking for seafood, he also found prawns. He happened to see this thing, so he took it. Another monster was a giant mantis prawn, which came from the same place as the luo prawn. However, Jiang Hai wasn't interested in mantis prawns, but he brought back a dozen of them. Of course, since Jiang Hai gave Antoine such a big business deal, he couldn't ask Jiang Hai for money for just a dozen of prawns. However, if Jiang Hai wanted to plant prawns and prawns, he would have to pay. According to Antoine's introduction, these prawns came from Thailand. In fact, it wasn't only Thailand, but other countries also had them. The Indian Ocean was a very mysterious place. There were 7 continents and 4 oceans in the world. Not many people lived in the Arctic Ocean, but not many people knew about the Indian Ocean. But if you were a real foodie, you would know that if you wanted to eat seafood, you had to eat the Indian Ocean. One of the reasons was that the pollution in the Indian Ocean should be the lightest. Of course, it was very heavy now. But compared to the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, it was considered light. In the Pacific Ocean, countries like the west coast of the United States, Xia, Soviet Russia, Japan, and Australia had started to pollute this sea many years ago. The Atlantic Ocean was the source of the Europeans' starting point. Now, when they went to other countries, they would say that the air here was good, the environment here was good, and so on. However, these countries came from the industrial era, just like Xia. When they started to develop their economy, infrastructure, and industrial construction, it was impossible for there to be no pollution. The Atlantic Ocean was the most polluted sea. Now, many parts of the Atlantic Ocean were underwater with natural gas pipelines and oil drilling platforms. It would be strange if the pollution was small. But now, they did not need to develop these vigorously, so they talked about environmental protection every day. As for the Indian Ocean, to be honest, there were no big countries around it. The only big country was India. The Ganges River was seriously polluted, but it was difficult for India alone to pollute the entire sea, not to mention that the country's heavy industry wasn't good enough. At the same time, the most important thing was that some of the countries along the Indian Ocean were basically tourism-oriented. For example, the famous Maldives and Sri Lanka were here. In terms of scenery, this place was not worse than the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. Secondly, this ocean, the entire sea, was almost on the equator. It was known that the warmer the place, the faster the growth of seafood. This was because they did not need to survive the winter and could grow all year round. At the same time, there were not many predatory fish here. At the same time, the most important thing was that the Indian Ocean was not peaceful. Everyone knew the reason. Many countries were making trouble there. In some places, everyone was a pirate. Everywhere, there were men who wanted to be the pirate king. Which fishing boat dared to go there? Basically, fishing was done on the coast. Not many people dared to go inside. Therefore, without human interference, the seafood in the Indian Ocean was especially delicious. Therefore, real foodies would pick the seafood in the Indian Ocean to eat. This was inevitable. Zhang Hai liked to eat prawns. This was probably his favorite seafood. Therefore, if this prawn tasted good, it would not prevent him from breeding it. After all, this was a big prawn more than 40 centimeters long. If he sold it back to China, TSK. Speaking of which, there was a story behind Zhang Hai's love of prawns. It was mainly about when Zhang Hai was young, his family was not very well off. Therefore, he did not eat prawns when he was very young. It was not until he was in the 3rd grade of primary school that he ate prawns at his grandfather's house during the New Year. At that time, it was still iced prawns. At that time, he felt that it was so delicious. Later on, when the family's financial situation was better, his father would also buy him some prawns to eat during festivals. At first, it was boiled, but later on, he started to fry it first and then spray it with sweet and sour sauce. He called it relying on big prawns. Zhang Hai had always liked to eat prawns. However, after his parents passed away, Zhang Hai had not eaten prawns for a while. Later, after he had his own territory, although Zhang Hai had eaten a lot of wild animals in the mountains, cattle and sheep on land, and seafood in the sea, he still had a special liking for prawns. Not long after, Chi had finished cooking the prawns. Zhang Hai's favorite dish could not be made with just prawns because they were too big. They could only be boiled, steamed with minced garlic, and roasted. After the 6 prawns were placed on the table, because it wasn't dinner time yet, everyone gathered around and shared the food. After eating, Zhang Hai also nodded. The biggest special thing about this prawn was that it was very refreshing. When he bit into it, it was all prawn meat. It was very delicious, but in terms of taste, well, it could only be regarded as not bad. After all, it was bred in the temperate zone, so the meat was not too sweet. Compared with the Arctic sweet prawn, the meat was slightly thicker, but finer than a lobster. It tasted good. Zhang Hai also nodded and decided to raise some prawns. Raising prawns was not like raising fish. He still had to buy fry and take care of them. In Zhang Hai's fishing ground, seaweed had long been spread, so when the young prawns entered the water, they could eat and live on their own. The most important thing was that prawns should grow fast. Generally, for the green prawns and white prawns bought outside, the fastest could be put on the market in 60 days, and the slowest could be put on the market in more than 100 days. Although the Russian prawns could not be put on the market like these prawns, when they were bought, they were 2 months old. After 3 months, they could grow to 30 grams in 5 months. Then it was like blowing air. Basically, after more than a year, they could grow almost fully. Not to mention, Zhang Hai's sea was full of spiritual energy, so there was no need to worry about this. When Ituan came to deliver fish food, he could ask him to help buy a few tons of prawn fry. Yes, Zhang Hai bought so many fish this year, and he must also put bait, which was cuttlefish and octopus fry. These things were much better than feed. Shanghai's fish ate these wild things. What's more, when these baits grew up, they tasted very good. Shanghai used to like to eat teppanyaki squid. Now, he ate it casually. The first batch of squid he raised, although the type was small, had been nourished by spiritual energy. Now, the squid in Shanghai's manner was not much smaller than the prawns. If their whiskers were not straightened, they would be about 40 centimeters long. Just as Shanghai was eating and thinking, his phone suddenly rang. He picked it up and saw that the caller was none other than Moses Adams. This guy had not appeared for a while. The last time he appeared, he was in Washington. This time, he called him at this time. It was obvious that he did not come to greet him. "Hello, Moses, what's the matter?" Based on Shanghai's familiarity with him, naturally, there was no need to call him by his full name, but Shanghai felt a little uncomfortable just calling his name because it was like a call from a Japanese. "Hi, Jiang. I just received an invitation here, so I'm calling to ask you." Hearing Shanghai's words, Moses Adams also said with a smile. Hearing his words, Shanghai was stunned for a moment. Why did he invite him? Are you confused? Your invitation? Why are you asking me? He asked doubtfully on the other side of the phone. Oh, I didn't make it clear. I received an invitation from the San Antonio City Council. They invited you to participate in their livestock show. Didn't you go there last year to slap their faces? Now you've beaten these Texans into submission. They're still holding it this year, so they specifically asked you if you'd like to go. Hearing Shanghai's words, Moses Adams also said. Chapter 960. San Antonio Livestock Show. Hearing Moses Adams' words, Shanghai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Why did the livestock show want to see him? Shanghai remembered that in April last year, he went to the American Livestock Show. As a result, he came back after slapping everyone's faces. He didn't even have a good time. Now the government was looking for him? What the hell was this? Hearing Shanghai's words, Moses Adams also laughed and then explained to Shanghai, yes, they're looking for you. Although you slapped everyone's faces last year, after all, your cattle also became famous, and you also helped the show become famous. These people are just the people in charge of the show. They don't care who gets first place, who slaps whose faces. They only care about who can help them make more money. If there was a country's business world that was the most unsympathetic, it would be the American business world. American businessmen often called it a game, a crocodile game. What kind of crocodile game was this? Because in the business world, they didn't believe in tears or friendship. They only cared about who was bigger. When crocodiles were hunting, they would cry first. This was called the most hypocritical tears in the West. In the past, Westerners thought that crocodiles were moved by the people they ate before eating people. Later, it was confirmed that crocodiles really didn't cry. They only shed tears to lubricate their eyes and enter the hunting state. So if you saw a crocodile crying, you had to be careful because it meant that it was ready to hunt. Crocodiles, as cold-blooded animals, weren't smart and didn't feel moved. Crocodiles were like snakes. They couldn't be tamed. Because they didn't have any emotions in their minds, they wouldn't be moved, they wouldn't be afraid, they wouldn't be scared, and they wouldn't have things like friendship and friendship. In the Western business world, only one thing mattered was whether you were rich enough. Shanghai slapped everyone's faces last year. Shanghai offended the local cowboy group last year, but so what? As long as Shanghai's cattle were in the exhibition, after a year of fermentation, needless to say, it would definitely attract a lot of attention. If people came to buy tickets to watch the show, it meant that there was money to be made. If there was traffic, it would attract advertisers and the organization would make money. This was the simplest thing. So this year, San Antonio sent an invitation to Shanghai again. No one knew that Shanghai wouldn't be invited to the National Beef Show in April, but they were very interested in the San Antonio Beef Show. In fact, if it was really in April, Shanghai probably wouldn't be able to go. Because this April, Shanghai was very busy, not because of anything else, but because of the harvest of Yangtze River grenadier fish. At that time, his first batch of grenadier fish would enter the Huaxia market. As for how much he would sell it to the rich, let's not talk about that. Whether it was in Huaxia or the United States, Shanghai had always sold things in a bad way, because he knew that the people who ate his food were not ordinary people, and few ordinary people could afford it. No one was willing to spend half a month, or even several months' salary to eat Zhanghai seafood or beef, so Zhanghai didn't feel guilty about selling it. Well, the livestock show. Touching his chin, Zhanghai whispered, "Should I go or not?" This was a problem. Ahem, it's just my feeling. If you don't have anything to do, you can go and have some fun. Hearing Zhanghai's hesitant voice, Moses Adams on the other side of the phone said to Zhanghai, "Well, what do you mean?" Hearing his words, Zhanghai looked at him with some doubts. "The main thing is, your main business is selling beef cattle and pasture. It's very troublesome to attend beef cattle shows often, because I know you don't lack buyers, but it's also necessary to attend it once a year to make a name for yourself. You can't let your pasture and beef cattle fade out of the eyes of others. The most terrible thing is to get used to it. Just like Japan's Wagyu, once they appeared, they would sweep through all the major livestock shows. As a result, people were not used to it first, but after a few years, they got used to it. They all know that their beef is good and the beef is expensive. They will even classify Wagyu as the same grade. Although your manor doesn't have a unique breed of beef cattle, if you can let people get used to it, if you raise the price in the future, or if there are any accidents, the tolerance of the masses will also become stronger." Hearing Zhanghai's question, Moses Adams also said seriously, "Of course, the reason why he recommended Zhanghai so hard was mainly because of the above. Another reason was that he had also received benefits from the organizers. Now he was the legal representative of the San Antonio Livestock Show. In these 3 weeks, it was estimated that he would make $1 million or $800,000. Well, I'll discuss this with Robbins Garcia first, and then I'll give you an answer." After thinking about it, Moses Adams was right. He couldn't always be mysterious. After all, he had started to sell pasture. However, he still couldn't guarantee that he would attend the show. He still had to ask the professionals, and the most professional cattle farmers in his manor were naturally people like Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar. "Okay, I'll wait for your reply." In fact, after hearing Zhanghai's words, Moses Adams already knew that it was most likely going to happen. He had known Zhanghai for more than 3 years. This guy was famous for being stubborn. As long as he was willing to consider something, it meant that there was a 90% chance that it would happen. He didn't even want to listen to anything. Even if you gave him money, he wouldn't even look at it. As the old saying went, listen to others and you will eat your fill. However, Zhanghai hated it when others tried to persuade him. "What's wrong? You're leaving again?" After hanging up the phone, Chi-Jie looked at Zhanghai and said unhappily. Zhanghai had just returned for a few days, and now he was leaving again? Although she and Zhanghai weren't newlyweds, they could be considered as an old couple. However, she still liked to be around Zhanghai all day long, and didn't want Zhanghai to go on business trips often. I'll do some research." Hearing Chi-Jie's jealous words, Zhanghai smiled awkwardly. His original idea of going also dissipated a lot in an instant. It was said that a woman's home was a hero's grave. Zhanghai was not a hero, but he couldn't bear it either. Indeed, he was also a little uninterested in going to a place that he didn't like very much. Moses Adams really knew Zhanghai very well. When Zhanghai said that he wanted to do some research, he had almost agreed in his heart. However, he didn't think about the problem of Zhanghai's woman. Hearing Zhanghai say that he wanted to do some research, Chi-Jie wrinkled her nose at him and then went to deal with the prawns. In fact, in her opinion, the prawns tasted pretty good. Zhanghai thought about it, washed his hands, and went to find Robbins Garcia. Indeed, he didn't really want to go now, but as said just now, the best thing about Zhanghai was that professional things were left to professionals. Since he thought that this matter was beneficial to him, then he had to ask Robbins Garcia's opinion. If he strongly recommended him to go, Chi-Jie couldn't stop him. Of course, she just said it, and she didn't necessarily want to stop him. "Boss, you're looking for me?" After leaving the house, Zhanghai stepped on the path from the door to the cowshed and quickly walked to the cowshed. From afar, he saw Robbins Garcia, Burt Dollar, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells, Belle Lester, Blake Hill, and Edie Lewis busy there, driving the cattle dogs that Zhanghai bought back then. They ran around and kept the cattle in a small area. Jiang Hai's Little Huang and Xiao Bai were also there, but Little Huang was not interested in driving the cattle. In Jiang Hai's manner, Little Huang's status was superior, but Xiao Bai was very addicted to commanding the cattle dogs. When he saw Jiang Hai from afar and waved at him, Robbins Garcia, who was commanding, also rode over on a horse. It's like this. San Antonio found Moses Adams and invited us to participate in the San Antonio Beef Show. What do you think? Jiang Hai and Robbins Garcia were familiar enough, so he didn't need to be polite and asked him directly. San Antonio Beef Show? Why did they invite us? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia looked at him with some doubts. In his opinion, Jiang Hai had offended almost all the cowboys in San Antonio. These people now invited Jiang Hai to participate in the show. Is there any conspiracy, and Moses Adams is also involved in this? Hee, don't be so careful. It's not that these guys are looking for trouble with me, but because our meat is now quite famous in the United States, so these guys want to use our name to swindle people. With our beef cattle, it will definitely attract a lot of people, so they can sell advertisements and make money. Also, I think Moses Adams is right about something. We definitely have to attend an animal husbandry exhibition every year, not to make a name for ourselves, but to let everyone know that the world's #1 beef cattle is ours. We have to let them get used to our existence, just like Wagyu. We have to let our cattle, our brand, stand there, and they will know that we are not on the same level as them. Looking at Robbins Garcia, Jiang Hai also repeated Moses Adams's words. Of course, he also added his own understanding. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia was stunned. He didn't have such thoughts in the past, but he thought about it and realized that what Jiang Hai said was not unreasonable. Chapter 9:61. To be honest, this reason is really good, but I don't recommend you go. Otherwise, let me bring a few people. After thinking for a while, Robbins Garcia looked at Jiang Hai and said, from his point of view, Jiang Hai would not be of much use to the team other than his soul. To be honest, Jiang Hai himself was useless. He did not know how to take care of the cows, nor did he know how to feed them. He was also not on good terms with the organizers. To be honest, Robbins Garcia asked Jiang Hai to participate in the first place. First, it was to let Jiang Hai relax. Second, if there was any business, Jiang Hai would have to go and discuss it. He was the boss, and everything had to be decided by him. Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson were particularly good at this point. They didn't want to command Jiang Hai casually just because they knew the industry. They would always give their opinions, whether or not to sell it, whether or not to buy it, and how much it would cost. It was all up to Jiang Hai. Since they knew that Jiang Hai might be in some trouble, there was no need to let Jiang Hai go. For them, Jiang Hai's safety was the most important issue. There was no other issue. Therefore, when Jiang Hai said this, he shook his head and said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also thought about it. Indeed, he would not be of much help. The main thing was to get a general direction. However, Jiang Hai and the others did not need to make a name for themselves. Secondly, they did not need to sell beef. Therefore, it was fine to send Robbins Garcia. However, Jiang Hai had never sent them alone before, so he could not make up his mind. Don't worry, there won't be a problem. Have you forgotten that Dulles Gerard and the others have also been to Europe to sell red wine? Looking at Jiang Hai's hesitant eyes, Robbins Garcia smiled and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also nodded. This was a good thing. In the future, he would not have to do everything by himself. After all, Jiang Hai was very lazy. Okay, in that case, you will personally lead the team. You can choose the people and cows. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said seriously. Hearing that Jiang Hai had decided to trust him, Robbins Garcia also smiled. This was a good thing for him. If he could do things well this time, it would undoubtedly be a bonus to Jiang Hai. A few days ago, after Edward Anderson came back, he also told him about Jiang Hai's purchase of fish seedlings. If there were no accidents, the total income of the fishermen would exceed 100 million in a few years. Of course, it was not referring to Jiang Hai's income, but the income of the fishermen. Therefore, before that, he had to show his loyalty to Jiang Hai. He could not leave the land side behind. Of course, Jiang Hai had already told him that the money from selling grass would be counted as the cowboy's commission. However, when it was time to show his loyalty, he would not give up. Hearing that Jiang Hai allowed him to go, he also patted his chest, indicating that Jiang Hai could rest assured. Then he went to find Bert Dollar and the others. This time, he would lead the team alone, so Bert Dollar, the big cowboy, would be in charge of the rest of the cowboys after he left. Now, there were some tasks that needed to be handed over. Seeing that Bert Dollar was busy, Jiang Hai also went to the stable in the distance. His little Xia had now become the Xia. Seeing that Jiang Hai had come, the giant horse happily raised its front hooves, but when its front hooves fell, the sound was indeed a little frightening. Looking at the giant horse, Jiang Hai also smiled, then went over and patted its head. "We just met this morning, and you miss me so soon." Seeing the horse snorting and lowering its head, Jiang Hai also said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll take you out to play." Seeing little Xia sticking to him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then he opened the stable and took out the giant horse. Then he went to the side and pulled out the saddle and dragon head. Little Xia was very sensible. He stood in place and let Jiang Hai do these things for him. When everything was done, Jiang Hai flipped his body onto the horse's back. With his legs clamped, little Xia began to run briskly around the field. Little Xia was very smart. He stood there and let Jiang Hai do these things for him. Thinking back, when Jiang Hai first saw little Xia, it should be 2 years ago when he had just bought the cow. At that time, little Xia was still a mixed-race pony. It was not good-looking, but its skeleton was very big. When Jiang Hai bought it, it was still a little irritable, but with the nourishment of spiritual energy, its spiritual wisdom was also opened. With more than 2 years of growth, little Xia's current physique had reached the level of its ancestors. With that huge figure, even Jiang Hai would feel a little too tall every time he rode it. The other horses were shorter than it by more than a head. Now little Xia was the horse king of this herd. In the past, Shire horses had a problem. Because they were too heavy, the horse's bones could not bear the weight of the horse itself. Therefore, ordinary Shire horses might not even be able to trot, let alone run fast. However, Jiang Hai's little Xia did not have such a problem. Its size was not small, but it could still run. Although its running speed was much slower than other horses, at least it could run. Trotting and even jumping was not a problem. Perhaps it was because Jiang Hai kept it in the stable all day long, so Jiang Hai provided it with quite a lot of spiritual energy. Riding little Xia around the manor, Jiang Hai deliberately went to the greenhouse he built and took out some carrots. He washed them and gave them to little Xia to eat. The greenhouse built by Jiang Hai was really convenient. This way, they would have fresh vegetables to eat in the winter. However, everyone knew that the vegetables in the greenhouse did not taste very good. However, Jiang Hai had spiritual energy. When his vegetable seeds were soaked, he would inject spiritual energy into them. Although it was not a lot, at least it allowed the vegetables to grow perfectly and nourish the soil. In addition, Jiang Hai did not use pesticides or fertilizers. They directly put in chickens and wyverns to prevent insects. Although some of the vegetables would spoil, Jiang Hai did not use pesticides or the like. After Prawalton came to Jiang Hai to eat the vegetables here, he also wanted to import Jiang Hai's vegetables. However, Jiang Hai did not agree. What a joke! How much was the price of selling beef and vegetables? Although vegetables were more expensive than ordinary beef, vegetables could not be sold for hundreds of dollars per kilogram. Therefore, in this case, Jiang Hai could enjoy himself. After feeding little Xia, Jiang Hai put it back in the stable. Then, he was not in a hurry to go back. Seeing that the vegetables were growing well, Jiang Hai also went to look at his other things. After going to the greenhouse, Jiang Hai looked to the other side. When Jiang Hai came back from China, he brought a lot of things with him. Not only were there long-jawed croakers, large yellow croakers, Chinese bahaba fish, 9 caddies of yellow croakers, chicken, songjiang, fragrant pigs, German donkeys, and Langshan chicken. These were all necessary things on Jiang Hai's table. However, in addition to these things, Jiang Hai also brought a lot of other seeds, such as sand nest radish, rice from the northeast, and saffron from near Shanghai. Yes, There was no mistake. They were indeed from near Shanghai. Jiang Hai should have introduced saffron before. Saffron was actually a matter of translation. The Tibetan region did not produce it. More than 90% of the saffron in Huaxia was produced near Shanghai. Therefore, the best flower balls were also from there. After more than a year of growth, all these things had actually already grown up. Not to mention the chickens, donkeys, and pigs. Jiang Hai and the others did not plant rice last year because they did not know how to plant it. However, the saffron flower balls and sand nest radish were planted. Sand nest radish was produced in Tianjin and was considered a combination of vegetables and fruits. It was very crispy and had plenty of water, but there was also a problem. That was, the production was not very high. It cannot be cooked as a dish, such as stir-frying or stewing. This kind of radish could not be done. It could only be eaten cold or raw. However, this kind of radish was very popular with the people in Jiang Hai's manor. They ate radish in winter and ginger in summer. It kept them healthy all year round. Although Jiang Hai did not like ginger, radish was still pretty good. Therefore, he ate a large radish almost every few days. As for saffron, it was a little troublesome. The people in Jiang Hai's manor were all rough people. There were no meticulous people. This included Aphrodite and the others. They had never planted these things before. This was not something that could be planted just by digging a hole, burying some soil, and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This thing needed to be divided into balls and stems. It was very expensive. Originally, Jiang Hai made this thing because it was valuable and good for women's health. In the end, it was quite troublesome. In August last year, Jiang Hai and the others directly planted the flower balls that Jiang Hai brought over. At least 2/3 of them were destroyed. But now, it seemed that the effect of spiritual energy was really terrifying. Even if Jiang Hai and the others did not know how to plant it, the 1/3 that survived were now growing very well. They could be harvested around May. If this thing grew well, then Jiang Hai would have to consider whether to get some ginseng or something to plant here. In the past, he often read novels about farming. 100-year-old ginseng was a must-have. Now that his spiritual energy was getting stronger, it was impossible to plant 100-year-old ginseng in the past. But now it was not impossible. After he planted it, he would not sell it. It was not bad to keep it for himself to eat. In this case, in addition to ginseng, he could also plant some cordyceps, dendrobium ironhide, and so on. There were quite a lot of them. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai could not help but feel a little happy. These nourishing things should be very useful. Chapter 962. In the next few days, Jiang Hai and the others were preparing. What were they preparing for? Of course, they were preparing for Robbins Garcia's expedition. After Jiang Hai talked to Robbins Garcia about this, he started preparing for the trip to San Antonio. First, he had to choose the cows and the people. These two were the most important. The cows were the contestants, and the people had to be responsible for them. Because this time, Jiang Hai and the others were just going to win a random championship. Well, it was quite annoying to say that. But this was also the truth. So if they won first place, they had to give others second and third place, right? Otherwise, how boring would it be? Last year, Jiang Hai participated and won the top few. This year, he did not plan to do so again. So this time, the exhibition hall they booked was only a very small one. They sent a total of 2 cows. One of them was the favorite to win the championship, Jiang Hai's Angus cow. It was 1.5 years old, which was the best age. It wasn't as small as a 9-month-old calf, nor was it as old as a 30-month-old A-grade beef. An 18-month-old cow was just right. In addition to this cow, Jiang Hai also brought a short-faced cow. However, this cow wasn't going to participate in the beef cattle selection, but rather the dairy cow selection. Yes, short-faced cows can be used for both meat and milk. Currently, Jiang Hai had 5,000 of these cows in his manor. Naturally, the bulls would be killed for meat, while the cows would be used to raise calves and milk. This cow was more suitable than the Angus cows. To be honest, the Angus cow's milk wasn't good to drink, and the milk they produced wasn't enough. The shorthorn cow that Jiang Hai sent this time was already pregnant when he bought it last year. Not long after the purchase, it gave birth to calves in the manor. After the calves were born, it began to produce milk. Not sure if it was because Jiang Hai's pasture was really good, but the amount of milk produced was huge. It was not like the amount of milk produced by a cow that gave birth for the first time. And the milk tasted good. In Jiang Hai's opinion, it was even similar to the Dutch cows. Even Robbins Garcia thought that the milk was very good, and Jiang Hai could produce it. So this time he sent these two cows. The Angus cow was going to win the championship, and this shorthorn cow was going to see what grade Jiang Hai's milk was. Two cows were not very troublesome. So this time, Robbins Garcia was only going to take two people. One was Harriman Fells, who Jiang Hai had introduced to him. Harriman Fells was stimulated when he was young, so his brain was not very fast. But he was in good health and was willing to work. In the manor, besides Jiang Hai's women, Harriman Fells and Knursen Peters were the most loyal to Jiang Hai. Because in their eyes, Jiang Hai was not only their benefactor, he gave them jobs, gave them money, gave them a place to live, and gave them dignity. In the past, when Harriman Fells was in the small town, the adults all pitied him. But pity is not the same as love and respect. Pity is pity. It is a kind of charity from top to bottom. I take care of you because I feel sorry for you. It is like seeing a beggar feel sorry for you and giving him some money. Although Harriman Fells did not say it, his self-esteem made him very uncomfortable. So after he could work, he had been working very hard. He did not want others to pity him. He wanted others to treat him as an equal. After entering Jiang Hai's manor, he had these things. Jiang Hai would order him around as if he was ordering others. This might seem inhumane to others, but this was what Harriman Fells wanted to do. Of course, Jiang Hai would not let him do any delicate work. He was more willing to do weeding, cleaning, and so on. In the past few years, the money Jiang Hai had given him was enough to make the American girls ignore his slow thinking. In addition, his good friend, Knursen Peters, was Jiang Hai's bodyguard in name, but to be honest, Jiang Hai's real bodyguards were Azalina and the others. So he really had nothing to do every day. The only thing he could do was to do odd jobs and exercise his body. As roommates, Knursen Peters and Harriman Fells got along quite well. Harriman Fells was now no smaller than Knursen Peters. He was strong and big. Last year, when the new bulls arrived, he subdued a frightened young bull. The bull was brought in as a breeding bull. It was huge. In terms of weight, it was 1,480 kilograms, 1.5 tons. But he could subdue such a guy. It was because of that incident that Robbins Garcia had a direct understanding of his strength. The Angus cattle were small beef cattle, and the shorthorn cow was still a cow. With Harriman Fells in charge, there would be no problem. The second one to go with him was called Black Hill. He was a newcomer. As for the people left in the manor, the nominal leader was Burke Dollar, and the deputy was Philemon Turner. Belle Lester, Gladstone Nelson, and Edie Lewis all stayed in the manor. With these 5 people, Robbins Garcia was more at ease. The 2 cows were brought out to live alone for a few days to let them get used to life without a herd. Then Jiang Hai contacted Zheng Jin, who had returned to work, to prepare a plane to transport them directly to San Antonio. The livestock exhibition in San Antonio lasted for a total of 3 weeks, but it did not mean that Robbins Garcia had to stay there for 3 weeks. There were many activities in these 3 weeks, such as the street cattle herding activities, which seem to be learned from Spain. There are also cowboy competitions, cowboy bull riding competitions, saddle-less riding competitions, cattle throwing competitions, and so on. There were also many bands that would hold concerts during this period, mainly singing country music and country rock. This would take up a lot of time, so even if Robbins Garcia and the others went, they wouldn't be able to stay for that long. According to them, they would be back in about a week, or at most 10 days. That would be about it. All the preparations continued. Jiang Hai personally sent them to the airport and watched them get on the plane. This was also the first expedition of Jiang Hai's cowboy team. He hoped that they would have a good result. Of course, Jiang Hai did not know what the result would be. As the plane took off, Robbins Garcia, the 2 cows, and the 2 men slowly flew to San Antonio. When they arrived in San Antonio, the people in San Antonio specially came to pick them up. Robbins Garcia specifically talked to Zhang Hai and then arranged for the two cows to go to their exhibition hall. Compared to last year, they only treated Zhang Hai as a fat sheep. This year, they really took Zhang Hai's soaring dragon manor seriously. Although it was only a small exhibition hall, it was placed in a very important position, and the security there was also the best. After Robbins Garcia settled the cows, he left Harriman Fells here to look after them, while he and Brevard Hill went back to rest first. They would come back in the evening to replace him. Of course, Harriman Fells had no objection to this arrangement. When Zhang Hai's soaring dragon manor appeared here, it caused some disturbances. This was because in the United States, there were almost no cowboys who did not know about Zhang Hai's soaring dragon manor. Of course, there were also some ranchers who did not pay attention to this at all. However, everyone who came to participate in this livestock exhibition knew about the soaring dragon manor and its cows. Originally, when the organizers sent Harriman Fells here, many people came to watch. These people were also people who came to participate in the exhibition. Although there would be security in the exhibition hall, how many people were really relieved? When Zhang Hai participated in the beef show for the first time in New York, some people came to make trouble. Even the security guards might not be reliable. You can't completely rely on others for safety. Therefore, in Zhang Hai's exhibition hall, as long as there were cows, there would be people watching it 24/7. It was the same in other exhibition halls. Some had one person, some had two people. Now that they saw the soaring dragon manor, these people came over. To be honest, there were people who were not curious, but not many. They also wanted to see why Zhang Hai's cows could be sold at such a high price. Moreover, they heard that Zhang Hai made money by selling grass. This world was really unfair. For poor people like them, cows were worthless, and grass was even more worthless. For rich people like Zhang Hai, cows were valuable, and grass was even more valuable. These people looked outside for a while, and many people who knew the industry gave a thumbs up to Zhang Hai's cows. With their innocent eyes, they could not find any fault with them. The color of the cow's fur was quite good. Their fur was shiny and smooth, and their eyes were very lively. There was not a trace of lethargy in them. Compared with the carefully selected cattle at home, Zhang Hai's cattle had the advantage just from the appearance alone. At the same time, when some people saw that the troublesome Robbins Garcia had left, they approached Harriman Fells in an attempt to get some information out of him. Unfortunately, there was a reason why Robbins Garcia left Harriman Fells here. It was precisely because this fellow knew that his brain was not fast enough, that he had always kept a respectful distance from those who did not have good intentions. No matter what they said, he would just pretend that he did not hear them. This move of his was very smooth. Chapter 963. Hey, I say, who is that guy over there? Why does everyone here surround him when he comes? Don't you see that he clearly doesn't want to talk to them? Is this interesting? A cowboy with a cigarette in his mouth looked at the people in the distance who had been rejected by Harriman Fells, but they still went forward to talk to him. The man said with some confusion, "Hey, you don't know him. Then do you know the meaning of the sign hanging over there?" Hearing this man's words, the middle-aged cowboy he asked didn't care. He took the cigarette in his hand, lit it, and pointed to the sign hanging above the exhibition hall in the distance. Looking at the sign, the man frowned and then shook his head. "You are a newcomer." Seeing that he didn't know the sign, the old cowboy couldn't help but laugh and say, "Hey, I just graduated from college last year. Because I have no future, I came back to help my father's ranch." Hearing that this man could tell that he was a newcomer at a glance, the cowboy who pretended to be old could not help but smile awkwardly. "I know you're a newcomer, but anyone who has been in the industry for a few years will know that sign." Hearing his words, the middle-aged cowboy smiled disdainfully, pointed to the sign in the distance, and smacked his lips gently. "That is a legend." "What do you mean? Is that company strong? I haven't heard my father talk about it." Hearing his words, the young man here also became interested and asked with a puzzled face. He really hadn't seen the company's sign. "Strong? No, it's not very strong. It's quite strong. Speaking of which, this company has only been popular for about 2 years. But the wealth it has created in these 2 years is something you can't earn even in 10 lifetimes." Glancing at the young man, The middle-aged cowboy smiled. Although he was a little jealous, what he said was correct. So bad *SS? Hearing that this company seemed to be very strong, the young man also sat down and asked with a puzzled face. Then I will tell you. This company is called Soaring Dragon. I heard that the boss is a Huaxia person. The sign above is the dragon of Huaxia. This story started 2 years ago. Seeing that the young cowboy was so interested, the middle-aged man also started to talk. Perhaps because his voice was a little loud, it didn't take long for many people to gather around him to listen to his story. Harriman Fells, who was not far away, also heard their conversation, but he chuckled. The middle-aged man's story was very interesting, but even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't know what the truth of the matter was. But then again, he didn't know what the truth of the matter was. To be honest, Jiang Hai was the only one who knew why these cows were so good and how this company started. On the next day, Jiang Hai's small exhibition hall was crowded with people. To be honest, most of the cowboys were even more confused. Why were Jiang Hai's cows so popular? They really couldn't understand. But whether they understood it or not, Jiang Hai's men knew that this year's champion would be none other than them. Just as everyone was talking about Jiang Hai was driving his car towards the town. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai sent his men to San Antonio. He was also a little hesitant at the beginning. Beef cows were different from red wine. To be honest, Jiang Hai didn't particularly value the red wine business. It belonged to the type of business that didn't matter if he had it or not. Therefore, he sent Dulles Gerard to brew red wine and then promote it in Europe. He didn't care too much about whether it would be promoted or not, but beef cows were different. Jiang Hai's beef cows were his main source of income now. However, today's matter could be regarded as satisfactory. Although Jiang Hai wasn't invited to San Antonio, they invited Jiang Hai's cows. Now, the popular ones were Jiang Hai and the Soaring Dragon Manor. With the Soaring Dragon Manor's cows, this was also a good choice. Moses Adams also became the legal counsel of the conference as he wished, and Jiang Hai was bound to have a good result. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai didn't leave this time. His women were quite happy. It's good that you don't leave. Otherwise, when can we have children? Looking at Jiang Hai's arrangement, Qi Jia also said with a smile. To be honest, they had been with Jiang Hai for a while, although they didn't do that kind of thing every day. However, most of the time, they did it once every other day. But even so, until now, they hadn't gotten pregnant. It had been confirmed that Jiang Hai didn't have any problems. Then what about them? It was impossible to think about it. It was impossible for so many people to have problems, right? So now, their only thought was that since it wasn't easy to get pregnant, then they would do it more. They would get pregnant eventually. Jiang Hai was very interested in this kind of thing. However, no matter how interested he was, once it came every day, Jiang Hai would feel a little scared. It was said that 30 was like a wolf, 40 was like a tiger. Now, Qi Jie and the others hadn't reached the age of being like a wolf yet, but Jiang Hai already felt that he couldn't protect them. If in the future, So after sending off Robbins Garcia and the others yesterday, Jiang Hai had been working hard when he returned. According to Qi Jie and the others, since it was winter and there was nothing to do outside, it was better to stay at home and have children. What they got pregnant. So, Jiang Hai almost didn't get out of bed after returning to the manor yesterday. This morning, they wanted to pounce on him, but Jiang Hai dodged them. If this continued, even if he had 8 times the physical fitness of an ordinary person, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. So, he found an excuse to go to the county. As for what excuse he used, Jiang Hai felt a little nervous when he said it, because he said that he was going to buy soy sauce. Fortunately, Jiang Hai's family had too many people, so the consumption of seasonings was indeed high. After finding an excuse, Jiang Hai was relieved. He drove to Winthrop Town. Since he said that he was going to buy seasonings, the first thing he did was naturally to buy seasonings. He drove to the town's commercial street. There were many supermarkets there. There were large ones, small ones, and even those owned by Native Americans. Of course, they rented Jiang Hai's shops. Jiang Hai found a Chinese supermarket. In fact, it was a supermarket owned by Old Master Zhang Di Hai, Haishang Supermarket. Haishang Supermarket was not considered small among the Chinese supermarkets in the United States. It was considered to be above average. Since Jianghai's beef and fish helped, their industry had gradually expanded. At present, in terms of supermarkets, Haishang Supermarket was already a first-class existence among the Chinese supermarkets in the United States. Originally, Winthrop didn't have a Haishang Supermarket. The reason why a shop was open here was entirely because of Jianghai. Of course, this wasn't specially opened for Jianghai. Jianghai didn't have that much influence. This was completely open for the tourists of Huaxia. No matter where people went, it was inevitable that they would not be acclimatized, let alone the difference between the United States and Huaxia. Therefore, when Winthrop was developing tourism, Jianghai had once mentioned that it would be best if there were some family hotels that allowed tourists to cook their own food. Jianghai's suggestion was naturally approved by the people of Winthrop. Therefore, many people in Winthrop could cook their own food. Of course, if you were used to the food here, it would be very convenient to eat in a restaurant. However, for some seafood, it would be a little expensive to eat in a restaurant. But for now, it was basically okay, because ever since Jianghai opened the sea, he didn't sell lobsters and fish alone. Therefore, the seafood industry in Winthrop was still very impressive. Many of the things sold in the Haishang supermarket came from Huaxia, such as some spices. Americans didn't eat so many spices. Their spices were very simple and boring. These were prepared for the tourists of Huaxia. But now, they were prepared for Jianghai. After parking his car far away, Jianghai walked into the supermarket. Although this supermarket was called a Chinese supermarket and felt a little small, it was actually very big. It wasn't smaller than some of the large supermarkets in China. It occupied an area of at least 5,000 to 6,000 square meters. This was built by smashing several of Jianghai's shops. This supermarket was also divided into many areas like a normal supermarket. The home appliances area sold telephones, refrigerators, microwaves, TVs, sewing machines, and so on. This was also convenient for the local residents. In the household goods section, there were plates, bowls, plastic sheets, toilet paper, and so on. There was also a special makeup section. Basically, there were hair washing products, face washing products, and some makeup products. Everything was available. Walking inside, there was a special food area, dry fruit area, biscuits, milk, juice, and so on. After passing these, it was the largest fresh food area. There were rice, noodles, oil, salt, fruits, vegetables, fish, meat, and so on. Because it was a Chinese supermarket, the items on the shelves were labeled in both Chinese and English. Of course, there was only one price. Because in the United States, although RMB was not considered as waste paper, at least it couldn't be spent. After Jianghai entered the supermarket, he wandered around. Unknowingly, he walked to the seasoning area. Naturally, he swept up all the goods like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds. A bottle of soy sauce and old soy sauce, vinegar, tomato sauce, steamed fish, bean drum, oyster sauce, cooking wine, rice wine. It was a mess. As long as there was something on the shelf, Jianghai would buy it. Anyway, they would finish all these things. When Jianghai turned a corner, a familiar face appeared in front of him. Chapter 964. Sandy. Jianghai couldn't help but call out when he saw the person coming from around the corner. Yes, the person who came was none other than Shinny Clive. When she saw Jianghai, she was obviously stunned for a moment. Then she smiled and nodded. You're here to buy things too. Jianghai hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said to Shinny Clive. To be honest, Jianghai was a little at a loss when it came to Shinny Clive. Well, it wasn't wrong to use this word. After all, Jianghai had always had an affair with Shinny Clive. Although there was no real development, the two of them were like a layer of window paper that could be broken with a little force. However, ever since she was transferred to the town hall and met Chi Li, the relationship between the two of them became a little distant. It seemed that she couldn't accept having Jianghai with someone else. Jianghai couldn't say that she was wrong. After all, this was human nature. In Jianghai's manner, to be honest, there were too many freaks and there were very few normal people. Yes, you bought so much seasoning. Hearing Jianghai's words, Shinny Clive gently brushed her hair behind her ear. then looked at the things in Jiang Hai's car with some confusion. It wasn't common for someone to buy so much seasoning. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was embarrassed to say that it was because he loved many people. Hey, can't you see me? You're only talking to my sister. At this moment, another voice sounded in Jiang Hai's ears. Then, Jiang Hai saw that there was another figure beside Shenny Clive. When he saw this figure, Jiang Hai was familiar with it. Karma Cliff, Shenny Clive's younger sister. However, the two of them only had half of the same bloodline. However, the relationship between the two sisters was quite good. This kind of thing might not be common in Huaxia. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. In Huaxia, it was important to pay attention to who was first and who was second, but in America, this kind of thing was actually very common. Therefore, in America, there were many families that got together later, and the relationship between sisters and brothers was still very good. Compared to the Karma Cliff that Jiang Hai saw a few years ago, the current Karma Cliff had changed a lot. After all, she was in college, and she wasn't in her first or second year, but was preparing to enter her third year. She had also learned how to put on makeup and dress up. In China, when she was in her fourth year and first year, she was like a completely different person. Even more so in America. At this time, Karma Cliff's figure was getting better and better. Although it was still winter, she was wearing a woolen sweater, a pair of leggings, and a pair of short boots, which showed off her perfect figure. The places that should be big were big, and the places that should be thin were slim. Especially her two legs, which were straight and slender at the same time. A thin cotton padded jacket was draped over her arm, making her look very fashionable and beautiful. When she saw Jiang Hai looking at her, she purposely showed off her body, making Jiang Hai even more embarrassed. However, it was true that it wasn't good to look at a girl like that. Hi, Karma. With an awkward smile, Jiang Hai said to Karma Cliff. When she heard Jiang Hai calling her, Karma Cliff also smiled and stood behind Shenny Clive. She was very clear about the story between Jiang Hai and her sister, but at the same time, she also looked at Jiang Hai curiously. When she first met Jiang Hai was just a potential stock. You couldn't tell if he would become as good as he is now. But now it seems that it was her sister's mistake that she didn't catch this guy at the beginning. This is a perfect rich husband. You continue to shop. We still have to buy some things. Feeling that the air was a little awkward and frozen, Shenny Clive smiled politely at Jiang Hai, then pushed the cart past Jiang Hai. Hearing her in different words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It seems that there is no chance, but thinking about it, I was too greedy. I'm not just carrying the responsibility of a woman. Phew, let's just consider this as turning over a new leaf. Jiang Hai smiled and prepared to continue pushing the cart forward. But at this moment, Karma Cliff suddenly ran back and patted Jiang Hai on the shoulder. Hey, your phone is still the same one. Looking at Jiang Hai, Karma Cliff said to Jiang Hai, Oh, it's still the same one. Hearing Karma Cliff's words, Jiang Hai also nodded, not knowing what she was going to do. I have something to ask you. I will talk to you on the phone when I have time. Hearing Jiang Hai's answer, Karma Cliff quickly took some ketchup and ran away. Looking at her anxious look, Jiang Hai was completely confused. However, these had nothing to do with him. He couldn't understand why she wanted him to do it, so he shrugged and continued to push the cart forward. Soon, he bought all the things he wanted to buy and brought them to the car. Originally, he wanted to go out for a stroll, but now, he wasn't in the mood to go out. So, after thinking for a while, he drove back to the manor. Jiang Hai himself was a loser and an otaku. For him, there was nothing bad about staying at home. Driving, he soon came to Jiang Hai's manor. After parking the car, Jiang Hai got out of the car with a few large bags of things. Although these spices were really heavy, it was impossible for Jiang Hai to not be able to carry them. Walking inside with the things, Jiang Hai found that there was no one in the villa. Only Delina, Marian, and Taraga were sitting there watching TV. Seeing that Jiang Hai was back, they also looked up at Jiang Hai. Why are there only 3 of you? Where are the others? After putting the things in the kitchen and coming out, Jiang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him with some doubts. He touched the hair of Delina, who was sitting in the middle, and asked them. They went to take a bath. Slapping away Jiang Hai's hand, Delina pouted and said to Jiang Hai, "Take a bath? Then why didn't you go with them?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. "What's going on? They didn't take us with them. They just told us that if you came back, you should go with them." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marian also looked at Jiang Hai and said while blinking her eyes. Hearing her words, although Jiang Hai still didn't know what they were going to do, he still walked out of the door and walked towards the bathroom. When Jiang Hai left, the three girls also gathered together. "They're really too much. They didn't even take us with them." Taraga watched Jiang Hai walking away and said angrily, "Alas, we can't help it. Who told us to be his daughters, not his women? Didn't he notice that we're ready?" Looking at Jiang Hai's back, Delina rubbed a certain indescribable part above her well-developed breasts and said in a discouraged way. Jiang Hai really didn't know how they felt about Jiang Hai. However, Jiang Hai only knew that he had always treated them as his own daughters, although they were about the same age and had no blood relationship with him. "Hey, you're his daughters, but I'm not. Why doesn't he want me?" Throwing a disdainful glance at the two underage girls who wanted to do something to Jiang Hai, Delina proudly gestured at her well-developed breasts. Jiang Hai was 14 years old when he found Delina and Marian. After 3 years, they were already 17 years old this year. However, in Jiang Hai's eyes, children would always be children. Jiang Hai was already 29 years old this year. Who could he reason with? Tisk, don't even think about it. Oomph. After hearing Tarag's words, Delina and Marian made the most contemptuous hand gesture towards him at the same time before saying complacently. At the sight of their looks, Tarag gave up the thought of lecturing them. Instead, he directly charged at them. The three girls were in a mess at once. Although it was 1 versus 2, Tarag, who had lived in the forest since he was young, was much more powerful than Delina and Marian. Therefore, he gained the upper hand in this battle. However, Jiang Hai couldn't see the scenery inside the villa. At this time, he had already come to the bathroom. Because there were only Jiang Hai's girls, Jiang Hai didn't care and went straight to the big bathroom. But as soon as he walked in, Jiang Hai was startled. At this time in Jiang Hai's sight, he only saw Qi Jia, Chia, Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yinshun, Azalina, Aphrodite, Dana, Hilda, Paige, Shira, Ohilia, Bridget, Janice, Galena, and Wallace Shelley. These 15 girls were all wearing very simple but very seductive clothes. They were all kneeling neatly in front of him. Looking at their actions, Jiang Hai was surprised again. He found that he had a lot of lucky guesses today. "Master, do you want to take a shower first? Or do you want to do that first? Or do that while taking a shower?" Looking at Jiang Hai's dumbfounded look, Feng Yinchen blinked her eyes and said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "You guys, what the hell are you doing?" Looking at these girls in front of him, Jiang Hai walked in front of them with a puzzled look. What's going on? Why was there something he couldn't understand? But to be honest, the seduction was just a moment ago. Seeing Jiang Hai walking in, Feng Yinchen also waved to the people behind her. Aphrodite and the others took the initiative to stand up and walked to Jiang Hai's side to help him change his clothes. But when changing clothes, some parts of the body that can't be described always inevitably rubbed against Jiang Hai's body. And intentionally or unintentionally, they also pressed Jiang Hai's hand on some parts that can't be described. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai was even more stunned. His eyes looked around, but he didn't know what to say or do. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Feng Yinchen proudly raised her eyebrows at Qi Jia. This was her plan. Chapter 965. As for their relationship with Jiang Hai, in fact, when Jiang Hai got up and left this morning, they had already vaguely noticed it. However, it was a normal relationship between a man and a woman. Although Jiang Hai would not feel tired of them, it was always like this. Perhaps Jiang Hai was also a little tired. Therefore, after Jiang Hai left, Qi Jia and the others had a small meeting to summarize the problem of how to continue to squeeze Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai was unwilling, it would indeed be a little troublesome. However, they really wanted to make the best use of their time. At this time, Feng Yinshun, who was very good in this aspect, spoke. Men, in her opinion, were like kites. If you pulled him too tightly, he would not be able to fly high, and he would fall easily. No one could play with him. If you let him go too easily, he might fly away. This was also a very important problem. Therefore, controlling a man was like flying a kite. Sometimes it was tight, but sometimes it had to be loose. Of course, the loose mentioned now did not mean to find a few more girls for Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai's harem group was still quite large. Most of the people here had no desires. Those who were competitive were only a few people. The topic had gone off topic. Now, to let Jiang Hai go loose, it did not mean to find other girls for Jiang Hai. That would be great. Now, they had to turn the initiative into a passive one. Jiang Hai enjoyed the feeling of being forcibly possessed by a woman. It was commonly known as the feeling of being pushed back. However, being pushed back every day, Jiang Hai's heart would be annoyed one day. Today was a small sign. Therefore, what they had to do now was to let Jiang Hai have a sense of novelty. Just like an old married couple, sometimes there had to be some emotion, let alone them. Naturally, there had to be such a thing as emotion. Although Qi Jie and Qi Yi did not know much about this, since Feng Yinshin said so, they would give it a try. Anyway, there was no loss. Therefore, after Jiang Hai left, they went to Feng Yinshin and AI Xiaoxi's room. What did Feng Yinshin and AI Xiaoxi used to do? Models. Of course, this model might be in quotation marks. They were not like those international supermodels who could walk on the catwalk and have endorsements. Recently, people like them are called young models or online models. At most, they would be endorsement for some Taobao stores. More often, they would be photographed as goddesses of otaku and walk the peripheral route. Of course, these two had not been otaku, but they had been goddesses of otaku before. Those clothes and so on, maybe to add to the fun, they did not throw them away. Now it was time for everyone to pick. They liked what kind of clothes, what color, what kind they directly picked out in Feng Yinshin's room. Because Qi Jie and the others had agreed to a rotation system, now that these girls let them meet each other, they didn't feel uncomfortable. It wasn't like they hadn't messed around with Jiang Hai before, so they picked out the clothes very quickly. Azalina picked a translucent bikini, the kind that only had 2 small triangular pockets in the front, and the rest of the bikini was made of thread. She specially picked a bright red one, which was quite eye-catching with her bronze-colored skin. Qi Jie chose a striped swimsuit with a front button. There was no rope, only a bag that was about the size of a palm. There was a button in the front that looked like a flower. It could be removed with a gentle twist or a flick of the button. The bottom part of the swimsuit was a pair of triangular conservative pants that looked pure and clear. Feng Yinshin played a little more freely and directly made 3 masks. Well, in fact, it wasn't just a mask. It was just that 3 small masks happened to cover some parts, but it gave people more space to daydream. AI Xiaoxi was wearing a large V-neck shirt. The V-neck was almost open to the navel. There were also 2 triangular pockets and some straps on it. It looked very stylish and very cool. Qi got a very conservative bikini from somewhere, but unfortunately, there was no conservative bikini here. After putting it on, she found that it was more than 1 size smaller. This kind of bikini was often seen in Japanese cartoons. Even a fake otaku like Jiang Hai knew that this bikini was called kosui. It could make the upper body and lower body parts visible. After putting it on, she felt that something was wrong. When she wanted to take it off, it was already too late. She was forced to wear this bikini by the others. Also, Wallace Shelley's bikini was very impressive. She only wore a Honda bikini. This bikini was originally for people who were relatively small. It could hold up the fat and squeeze it into a shape. But she was a giant to begin with, so this squeeze only made her even more violent. After choosing the clothes, they said goodbye to Daliana, Marian, and Taraga, and then went to the bathroom. While taking a bath, they studied what to do when Jiang Hai came later. Jiang Hai didn't know this at this time. Until now that Jiang Hai came, they also began to use the moves they had just studied. Jiang Hai's clothes were taken off in a short time, and then someone pulled him to the hot spring. The girls here used the hot spring water to kiss Jiang Hai's body and spit out the water to help Jiang Hai bathe. Soon, Jiang Hai's body was wet. Then the girls let Jiang Hai stand up. They all applied bath lotion on their bodies, especially on some indescribable parts, and then began to help Jiang Hai with the bath lotion. At this time, Feng Yinshun went behind Jiang Hai and stretched out her hand to touch Jiang Hai's indescribable part from behind. Phew, you guys, wow. To be honest, Jiang Hai had experienced these things before. Whether it was when he went out to play or went to Prawalton, he had experienced such hospitality before, but it was far from being as shocking and moving as today. After all, in his eyes, those were all wildflowers. It was inevitable for them to work hard to please him, but these were all family flowers. He would treat them well even if they didn't do this. But now these girls were doing it. Jiang Hai felt something else. Is it fun? Looking at Jiang Hai's expression, although she didn't want to admit it, Qi Jie had to admit that Feng Yinshun was indeed very strong in this aspect. Sometimes it was more effective to let a man take the initiative. Thinking of this, she also came over and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. At the same time, she stuck out her tongue and licked Jiang Hai's neck. Looking at her pretty face and listening to her voice, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then he hugged her waist and kissed her on the lips. Seeing that the fire here was almost lit, Aphrodite and the others also washed the foam off Jiang Hai's body. Then 4 or 5 people knelt down and began to serve Jiang Hai's brothers. Under Feng Yunxin's signal, Aphrodite also began to use her tongue to attack Jiang Hai's back. When this feeling came, Jiang Hai really couldn't stand it. Come on. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai picked up Qi Jie, who had already been prepared in front of him, and was ready to fight directly. But at this moment, a harsh ringtone sounded. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't want to pay attention to it, but this phone kept ringing. At the same time, Qi also went over there. After seeing that the caller was Edward Anderson, she brought the phone to Jiang Hai. This damn, Jiang Hai muttered in a low voice. He had never hated Edward Anderson as much as he did now, but this hatred passed quickly and disappeared quickly. He knew that Edward Anderson definitely wouldn't call him for no reason, so he thought for a moment, and under Qi Jie's slightly melancholic gaze, he swiped to answer the phone. Hello, it's me, what's the matter? Suppressing his unhappiness, Jiang Hai asked Edward Anderson on the other side of the phone. Boss, there's big trouble. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also said calmly on the other side. What's the situation? Tell me clearly. Someone came to steal the fish? Listening to the motor of the boat on Edward Anderson's side and the sound of the sea breeze, Jiang Hai frowned. Now is not the time for fishing boats to go out to sea, because Jiang Hai and the others fishing more often go out to sea at night, so that they can use the fish luring light to push the fish together and catch better fish. Now that they're going out to sea, it means that there may be some trouble. Is someone coming to steal the fish again? It's more troublesome than that. It's not that someone is coming to steal the fish, but the fish are coming to steal the fish. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson almost gritted his teeth and said to Jiang Hai, Fish. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. What does it mean that the fish are coming to steal the fish? It's killer whales. There's a group of killer whales around our fishery. Hearing Jiang Hai's doubts, Edward Anderson no longer kept him in suspense and said directly to Jiang Hai. Hearing his gnashing teeth, Jiang Hai subconsciously wanted to say that the killer whales are in big trouble. Since Edward Anderson said it's big trouble, it may be big trouble. Okay, I'll go and see it right away. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai shrugged helplessly at Qi Jie and the others. To be honest, there is something going on in the manor now. He has to go and see it. Although these girls are working very hard, he is really ready. But he still has priorities. Hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai lowered his head and gave Qi Jie a deep French kiss. I like it very much. Really, I really like it. When I come back, let's continue. Looking at Qi Jie's eyes, Jiang Hai smiled, then said something to the girls around him, then quickly put on his clothes and left. Chapter 966. F** King Whale. Jiang Hai put on his clothes and got out of the bathtub. Indeed, Jiang Hai now had the intention to kill. But unfortunately, he can't kill people, so he can only kill fish. Whales are not fish. Anyway, he still dares to kill things in the sea. probably almost he dares to kill things in the sea. Anyway, Zhang Hai didn't care so much. He trotted back to his villa, then rode the four-wheeled motorcycle and ran away. Now the weather was warming up, and only some shady places had snow. The snow in other places had almost melted, so naturally, he had to ride the four-wheeled motorcycle. Zhang Hai rushed all the way to the dock. He originally wanted to go directly to the airport, but considering that Marin Rupert, who can fly now, is also on the sea, and Belle Lester has to take care of the cows, he is still a little scared to fly the plane himself. Although he also learned how to fly a plane, it should be different from driving a car. If a car crash happens, at most, the car will be destroyed. Zhang Hai and the others don't have any cliffs or anything, and it is impossible for the car to crash and die. As long as Zhang Hai is not killed immediately, then he can escape. But flying a plane is different. This thing may really be finished. Zhang Hai is so afraid of death, so he decided to drive a boat. When they arrived at the dock, Eleanor Cece, who stayed here, had already prepared a boat. Then the two boarded the boat and headed to the place where Edward Anderson sent the signal. Because they really drove very fast, about an hour or so, Zhang Hai saw Edward Anderson's boat from afar. In addition to their boat, there are many dorsal fins in the sea in the distance. These damn whales. Looking at the killer whales in front of him, Eleanor Cece couldn't help but curse. Then their boat approached quickly. After reaching the vicinity, before they could get close, Eleanor Cece had already thrown out a rope, which was caught by Tommy Charles on the boat. First, the boat and the boat were tightly pulled together, then quickly pulled the boat over and let Zhang Hai and Eleanor Cece board Zhang Hai's fishing boat. After Zhang Hai boarded the boat, he immediately ran to Edward Anderson's side and calmed his breath. Looking at the dorsal fins in the distance and Edward Anderson's serious face, Zhang Hai's face also became gloomy. Looking at the killer whales in the distance, he also counted them. He originally thought that it was just a small group, but now it seemed that he was too naive because this group of killer whales is definitely a monster. In other words, it means that Zhang Hai is really in big trouble at this time. These killer whales are definitely not a good thing for him. Some people will say that Zhang Hai is making a mountain out of a molehill, but why did Zhang Hai say that? That's because killer whales eat fish. In this world, no law is absolutely fair, such as the Environmental Protection Law, which is very important in the world. This law was actually very harmful to the fishermen and herdsmen. However, for the sake of the future of mankind, the government gave up on the benefits of these people. It had to be said that this was unfair to the fishermen, farmers, and herdsmen. This matter is the same everywhere. For example, in China, you work hard to raise some cattle and sheep, waiting to be sold. But when the wolf comes, the tiger comes and eats these cattle and sheep. If you kill the tiger, you have to be sentenced, but if you don't kill the tiger, in order to maintain the tiger's wild nature, the country is happy to see your cattle and sheep eaten. After being eaten, the government says that they will compensate you with some money, but the money is not even enough to buy calves and lambs. Who can you find to reason with? Moreover, your land is a waste of money because there are wild animals such as tigers and wolves here. How can you continue to raise them? But in fact, this is not bad in China. If it is in India or Africa, who will compensate you? If you are eaten, you deserve it. You're giving away the animals, but the laws and regulations there are not too strict. If you kill them out of revenge, no one will know. There are two sides to this. Compared with these countries, the situation in Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia is more annoying. It is the same for tigers and wolves. If they are eaten, they will compensate you with some money. It is up to you whether you want to sell your land or not. It is not clear whether anyone will buy it. Although the money they lost was more than what they lost in China, for Zhang Hai, the money they lost was just a fart. How much is his beef and fish worth? Is it something these guys can afford to pay? According to the current situation of the United States government, even if they lose all their money, they may not be able to pay Zhang Hai's property. Therefore, they're destined to pay according to the laws and regulations. Fortunately, the United States is not Australia. Australia is more ruthless. Driving in Australia, if a bird gets caught in your windshield and kills it, you will also be sentenced. Therefore, in order to avoid these troublesome things, Jiang Hai has been guarding against this for a long time. On land, he built a fence and raised 3 bodyguards in the forest. A mountain lion, although it is about the same size as an African lion, maybe even bigger than an African lion, a giant python, and a crocodile. These 3 guys are guarding him. On the other hand, Jiang Hai was able to deal with people on land. If animals came, these 3 guys would be able to deal with them. For example, coyotes and the like, if they dared to come, they would be courting death. Even if they were discovered by others, Jiang Hai would be able to push them away. He didn't know that these guys were killed in the food chain, so what did it have to do with him? Therefore, Jiang Hai basically has no worries on land. With these 3 guys escorting him, Jiang Hai is very relieved. In the ocean, such a thing has happened before, but at that time, a group of hammerhead sharks came out. Jiang Hai and the silly couple killed these guys and then sent a group of dolphins to them. Jiang Hai went into the water to see them a few days ago. The silly couple gave birth to 3 small sharks, and they looked quite big. The dolphins also have a new family. It seems that his guards are gradually growing, and they also know that they are basically hunting in the periphery of Jiang Hai's sea area. Occasionally, when they're not full or want to eat supper, they will come back to pick some fish that have no economic value but the same nutritional value to eat, such as some small tuna, bonito, and mini cod in the Atlantic Ocean. Later, Jiang Hai brought back his most powerful weapon at present, Roger, a giant squid. After feeding him a lot of aura and enough food, this guy was like a sea monster. With such a force here, it is not an exaggeration to say that it is impregnable, but unfortunately, this army was challenged today. Killer whale, also known as killer whale and killer whale, is a very smart animal. It is a social animal. Even humans are quite fond of this marine mammal because this creature is really like a puppy. It can be domesticated. To be honest, a long time ago, Jiang Hai also liked this creature very much. However, he only liked it when it was in the aquarium. He absolutely did not like it when it was in the ocean. This was not Jiang Hai being cold-blooded, cruel, or anything like that. After all, these guys weren't eating your fish. Naturally, many people would stand on a moral high ground and speak nonsense. So Jiang Hai didn't listen to what these people said at all. He only knew that now these guys are affecting his ability to make money. These guys are really here. Looking at the huge army of 41 killer whales in front of him, Edward Anderson's face was quite ugly. Now these killer whales are most afraid of this ship and the people on it. Their IQ tells them that these guys are not to be trifled with, so they're still watching. What do you mean? Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and asked him, "A long time ago, our fishery was targeted by killer whales, but every time they wanted to attack, they would be driven away by some dolphins. I remember that those dolphins were raised by you, and one of them was a big shark. It seems that you released it. It seems that they regard this place as their territory, so I didn't care too much about it, but I didn't expect that these guys still didn't give up on this place. They're actually entangled to attack us." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson took a deep breath and said with a dignified face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's eyes narrowed. He naturally knows that it was Big Fool and the others who drove these guys away, and if he's not mistaken, Big Fool and the others should also be in the nearby waters at this time. Sharks don't need to breathe. Jiang Hai can't see them underwater, but dolphins need to breathe, so they will float up from time to time in the distance. But with only 2 sharks and a dozen dolphins, how can they be the opponents of these guys? Even with Roger, it won't be enough. At this time, Jiang Hai's mind was constantly turning. To be honest, Jiang Hai himself doesn't want to hunt these spiritual creatures, but they're really threatening his fishery. What if he uses spiritual energy to turn them into his own subordinates? As soon as this idea emerged, Jiang Hai directly killed it. What a joke! Under such circumstances, how can he turn them into his own subordinates? Can he force out more than 40 drops of spiritual energy? When Jiang Hai first released his blood, he released up to 4 drops a day, which was like letting him masturbate 20 times, which was quite tiring. Later, he was able to force out spiritual energy. Looking at Aphrodite and the others, it took him several days to cure them. The most he did was to release spiritual energy to the dolphins. He released 14 drops at one time, and it took him almost a month to recover. Although he has become stronger now, he will probably be exhausted after releasing spiritual energy for 10 or 20 times. Most importantly, if Jiang Hai wanted to release his spirit chi, he would need the help of the media realm. He needed to touch these guys. Are you sure that when he touches this one, it won't be directly dismembered by the other 40? These guys are not stupid. What if they drag Jiang Hai into the deep sea? Wouldn't that expose his secret of being able to move underwater? This secret must not be exposed. If there were only 1 or 2 of them, Jiang Hai could still deal with them, but now there are 41 of them. What should he do? Can we hunt them? After thinking about it, Jiang Hai may really have no other way. So he looked at Edward Anderson and said seriously, since he can't subdue them or drive them away, he will start a massacre. Chapter 9:67. Unfortunately, I can't because it can see. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson pointed to the top of his head helplessly. He naturally didn't mean that God could see or God could see. He meant that the satellite could see. Killing wild animals, no matter what the reason is, Jiang Hai's lawsuit will be settled. And in the United States, just like in China, killing wild animals is punishable by going to prison. Jiang Hai is the backbone of their manor. If something happens to Jiang Hai, it will be troublesome. So when Jiang Hai just mentioned it, Edward Anderson rejected Jiang Hai with a gloomy face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's brows couldn't help but frown. Is this a silent loss? Just as Jiang Hai was in a dilemma, suddenly the group of killer whales in front of them moved. Maybe they really couldn't stand the food in front of them, so a sound like pulling rusty iron chains passed into Jiang Hai's ears. Boss, they're going to attack. Listening to these sounds, Edward Anderson said angrily, killer whales have a special feature. They can be regarded as the masters of language in the ocean because they can make more than 60 kinds of sounds, each of which has a different meaning. Now, the sound does not mean that they're going to attack. Use the water cannon. Use the water cannon to drive them away. Jiang Hai roared loudly as he hammered the railing. Jiang Hai didn't want to go to prison, and he couldn't go to prison. There are definitely a lot of people staring at him now. If he was still here, everything would be fine. If he went to prison and was gone, it is estimated that those bad guys would come out. Even the United States government would definitely not give him such an opportunity, so he must not give them any excuse. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson immediately ordered the adjustment of the water cannon. Although the water cannon also hurts wild animals, it is only hurting and driving them away. There will be no problem. In this world, no matter what, it is based on people. If they want to kill these killer whales, there will naturally be some trouble. But if they just drive them away, then even if the Environmental Protection Agency says anything, it will not pose any threat to Jiang Hai. With Jiang Hai's order, the water cannon on the big ship where he was also launched in an instant, directly hitting the 2 killer whales closest to him. The huge impact of the water directly knocked them back several meters. Then they shook their dizzy heads and looked at the ship in front of them in horror. To put it bluntly, these animals are still afraid of humans. This is also the fear of being killed by humans. This fear in their bones has penetrated into their DNA. Now that they see Jiang Hai really dare to hit them, they are afraid. Many killer whales turned their heads and ran. But at this moment, another voice sounded. It seems that the leader killer whale saw some clues. It was only a water cannon that hit them just now, not a whaling gun or a firearm. If it was just a water cannon, they would not be afraid. With the order of the killer whale, all the killer whales temporarily stopped their fear and then plunged into the sea. Killer whales are indeed good swimmers. They can dive below 300 meters and hold their breath for more than an hour. Of course, they usually come up to take a breath in more than 20 minutes, but the limit can even reach about 2 hours. Killer whales like to surround and kill humpback whales, even blue whales. Their method is to take advantage of their long diving time to directly surround these whales in the deep sea and not let them take a breath, so that they can suffocate them to death. These killer whales are all adult killer whales, and the non-adults probably did not let them come over, so their hunting experience is still quite rich. Now that they heard the call of the leader, They went directly into the water. Water cannon, water cannon. No matter how hard it is fired, it is still water, but water hits water. How many meters of impact can it have? Although it is strong in the air, it is useless in the water. Now the leader depends on whether Jiang Hai has a whaling gun or not. In fact, Jiang Hai did not have one, so he could only watch these whales dive into the water and quickly rush into his fishing ground. Seeing this, Jiang Hai's hand pinched the fishing boat because of excessive force, leaving fingerprints on the iron railing of the fishing boat. What should he do now? No one knew, including Edward Anderson. They were all staring at each other. Although they hated them, they had no way to kill these guys. If they could not kill these guys would continue to invade Jiang Hai's fishing ground. It was impossible to drive them away. These guys were such a dog-skin plaster. Even if Jiang Hai surrounded the fishing ground in the future, these guys would tear the barbed wire of the fishing ground and rush in. If they were not careful, they would be entangled to death. Then it would be Jiang Hai's responsibility. Yes, they were so unreasonable. Who the F asterisk CK? Who the F asterisk CK? Who the F asterisk CK? Looking at the group of killer whales rushing into a sea area, Jiang Hai was really helpless now, except for shouting hard. At this moment, a stream of water rushed over, and the Imperial Guards on Jiang Hai's side began to attack. The one in the lead was naturally Big Dumb. Now, Big Dumb was smaller than the killer whale, and even bigger than the biggest one. His wife was definitely not smaller than the average adult killer whale. These two were also the ones who rushed in the most. And the most important thing was that sharks did not need to breathe, so they had the advantage underwater. There is still a chance. Control the water cannon. If those killer whales dare to float up, hit them hard for me. Looking at the appearance of the water, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up, and he shouted loudly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people on his ship adjusted the position of the water cannon for the first time, aiming at the sea level, waiting for the killer whales to float up. Although they didn't know why the killer whales wanted to float up, Jiang Hai was the boss, and he had the final say. At this time in the sea, Big Dumb took the lead and rushed directly towards the killer whale in the front. This killer whale was not easy to deal with. Seeing Big Dumb rushing over, it did not retreat. As the top predator in the sea, the killer whale had never been afraid of shark. Of course, its brain was not enough to let it understand why this shark was so big in the first place. In fact, it was not the brave who would win, because Big Dumb was much stronger than this killer whale. At this time, there was no doubt about his combat effectiveness. He rushed over and bit directly at the killer whale in front of him. Looking at the rows of sharp teeth, at the last moment, the killer whale, a smart creature, was scared. It wanted to dodge and hit Big Dumb with its tail, but unfortunately, Big Dumb rushed directly to the tail. Only a click was heard. Big Dumb directly bit the killer whale's tail. Then, with a swing of his head, a large piece of the killer whale's tail was directly torn off. Big Dumb did not eat it. After spitting it out, he turned around and continued to fight the second killer whale. This killer whale lost the use of its tail fin. It couldn't run fast, and its combat effectiveness was greatly reduced. At this time, it also panicked and wanted to escape, but unfortunately, could it escape? Big Dumb's wife came from behind in an instant, bit on its stomach, and directly tore off a large piece of meat. This killer whale is dead. At this time, Big Dumb was also like a tiger in a flock of sheep and began to attack the second killer whale. For a while, Big Dumb was very powerful, as if there was no one around. The second killer whale did not last long. Its left fin was directly torn apart by Big Dumb. It wailed and wanted to retreat, but its tail was bitten off by Big Dumb's wife. Without one fin, the killer whale without a tail could only slowly sink to the bottom of the sea. Its result was to be crushed by the sea or suffocated by the water. Seeing the incomparable fighting power of Big Dumb and his wife, the killer whale leader here was also shocked. In fact, many of the killer whales here were driven away by Big Dumb and his wife. But in the past, because Big Dumb and his wife didn't lack food, they didn't chase after them. They were never so fierce. Now that Big Dumb and his wife started to play fierce, these killer whales were really scared. Good job. Seeing Big Dump's invincible strength, Jiang Hai also waved his fist. It was too awesome. However, the killer whales quickly stabilized. The one in the lead should be determined to enter Jiang Hai's fishing ground. Many killer whales began to set up their formation. 2/3 of the killer whales formed a circular formation, surrounding the silly couple from a distance. More than a dozen killer whales rushed to the dolphins in the distance. Originally, they were just trying to contain the dolphins in the distance. Killer whales eat dolphins. Regardless of whether those who like killer whales believe it or not, this is a fact. These dolphins, although nourished by Jiang Hai's aura, may have been because they were already adults when Jiang Hai bought them, so their size was not too big. Basically, now they were only 3 or 4 meters long. Such a length was far worse than the 8 or 9 meters long killer whales. If it was 4 against 1 killer whale, then the dolphins still had a good chance of winning. But now there were 2 dolphins. They had to deal with at least 3 killer whales, and they couldn't do it. The dolphins were almost instantly eaten by the same male killer whale, and then the remaining killer whales began to prey on the dolphins. Compared to the fishes in Jiang Hai's manner, these dolphins were the only ones that received Jiang Hai's complete spiritual qi. Later on, they were fed a lot of fish and beef with spiritual qi. Therefore, the temptation of these dolphins was much greater than the fishes. For a while, the killer whales on this side also opened their white teeth and bit Jiang Hai's dolphins. When Big Dumb and his wife saw that these guys dared to deal with their little brother, they rushed forward the first time, but unfortunately, 2 fists couldn't fight against 4 hands. A hero couldn't fight against many people, and a tiger couldn't fight against a pack of wolves. These killer whales gathered together, moving forward and retreating from time to time. While teasing Big Dumb and his wife, they trapped them in the battle circle. For a while, the scene was thrilling. Chapter 968. Jiang Hai's ocean was almost unpolluted. Of course, it cannot be compared with those diving spots, coral reefs, and the like. The bottom could be seen at a glance. Jiang Hai's visibility here was only about 3 or 5 meters. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. This sentence was not just a saying, but Jiang Hai's physical fitness 8 times that of ordinary people allowed him to see the fierce battle under the sea. Although he cannot see clearly, at least he could see the black shadows. At this time, in Jiang Hai's eyes, the situation of his underwater escorts can be described as bad. The group of killer whales on this side trapped the silly couple, while the group of killer whales on the other side attacked the dolphins. For a while, the dolphins were still in danger. The gap between the dolphins and the killer whales was too big. They did not swim as fast as the killer whales, and they were not as big as the killer whales. If they bit the killer whales would bleed at most, but if the killer whales bit them, they would die. But fortunately, Jiang Hai's dolphins had also evolved. Not only were they bigger, but they were also faster and more agile. Now, they were relying on their agile posture to constantly deal with the killer whales, but the killer whales were very intelligent. For a while, they saw that they could not take down Jiang Hai's dolphins one-on-one, so they changed their strategy. Several male killer whales continued to crash into the dolphins' formation, while some other killer whales began to surround and kill. 5-1. No matter how strong the dolphins were, it was absolutely impossible to escape. Just in Jiang Hai's eyes, in a flash, a dolphin was blocked by 4 dolphins here. Just as it was thinking about how to escape, a killer whale suddenly rushed out from below and directly hit the dolphin's stomach. The huge impact directly knocked the dolphin out of the water. Then this guy also jumped out of the water. He did not give the dolphin in midair any chance and directly bit it. Fire! Seeing that his dolphin was bitten and bleeding, Jiang Hai roared. His men also launched the water cannon at the first time and directly blasted the killer whale out in midair. Although the killer whale fell flat on the sea level, its head shook and it sank to the bottom of the sea again. As for the dolphin, it was already dead when it fell because its body was almost bitten in 2. Only some flesh and skin were still connected, and its eyes had turned grayish-black. "Give me the gun," Looking at the dolphin that floated on the water for a short time and then sank again, it was not an exaggeration to say that Jiang Hai's teeth were cracking. Seeing his men die in front of him, if Jiang Hai was not angry, then was he still a human? Boss! Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Edward Anderson hesitated, but he still did not give the gun to Jiang Hai. Instead, he held it in his hand. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai looked at him with some doubts. I killed the whale, boss. I can't do without you in the manor. When I come out, will you not let me come back? Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, Edward Anderson smiled and took a deep breath. It seemed that he had made up his mind. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai smiled bitterly. This is really bad luck. What kind of calamity was this? Boss, look over there. Just as Jiang Hai was about to say something to Edward Anderson, his subordinate Bill Zephaniah suddenly shouted loudly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked in the direction he pointed. At this time, on the sea surface in the distance, a huge flesh-white object was floating towards Jiang Hai's sea area. Looking at the huge guy, perhaps others did not know what it was, but Jiang Hai was very clear. Roger, looking at that guy, Jiang Hai was still wondering why he hadn't seen the giant spear squid, even though the battle had already started. Now it seems that this guy was running too slowly. Indeed, creatures like squid only relied on the kinetic energy generated by absorbing water and then spitting it out to move forward. The small ones looked more difficult to catch, but their speed was indeed far inferior to that of fish. It's up to you, Roger. Seeing this guy join the battle, although Jiang Hai was still not sure whether the arrival of this guy would reverse the situation, at least this was a hope. Holding down Edward Anderson's gun, Jiang Hai decided to take a gamble. When the killer whales over there saw the giant squid, they were also stunned because they rarely saw this kind of creature. Giant squid, the scientific name of the king squid, but it was not a king squid, it was a little bigger than a king squid. But for the killer whales, they had seen this kind of creature before, but it was not very common because the giant squid lived in the deep sea of about 2,000 meters, and they lived in the ocean of about 300 meters. Occasionally, they would see some of these creatures, but for this kind of creature, they did not seem to be a threat. Although the giant squid was very big, in fact, this kind of creature weighed less than a ton, and its lethality was very average. Its only ability was to block the vent of the whale and suffocate the whale. Killer whales usually would not catch this kind of creature because it was not delicious and troublesome. This thing was the favorite of sperm whales. Of course, the giant squid would not trouble the killer whales. Basically, the two could be regarded as well water, not interfering with the river water, but at this time, this guy rushed straight over, which had already shown its identity. It was a guardian, and looking at its size, it seemed to be bigger than the ones they had seen before. Squeak! Seeing this guy, the leader screamed twice, so two killer whales rushed over to catch up with this guy. If it did not leave, then they did not mind getting rid of this guy. But just as they rushed over, this guy made a move first. Originally, the wrists of this giant squid were almost as thick as a person's wrist. Of course, this referred to the tip. The root was even thicker, and with the nourishment of Jiang Hai's spiritual energy, it was clear that this guy had also mutated. At this time, Jiang Hai's Roger, if measured in net, was about 30 meters, which was definitely not inferior to the blue whale. It was even bigger than the boat Jiang Hai was now on. The wrists that were originally as thick as a person's wrist, under the nourishment of spiritual energy in these days, were as thick as the wrists of 4 adult men. Seeing the two killer whales rushing over, 2 of its 8 wrists shot out in an instant like big sticks, directly hitting the 2 killer whales. The 2 killer whales were stunned, and there was almost no room for them to react. They were directly hit by these 2 wrists. One must know that on these wrists, there were barb-like teeth. When these wrists came down, they instantly opened several deep wounds on the 2 killer whales. Blood flowed out in an instant, but it also aroused the anger of the 2 killer whales, and they opened their mouths to bite. But at this time, Roger originally shot out 2 wrists and circled around, directly pulling the tails of the 2 killer whales from behind. Then, without saying a word, it directly pulled the 2 guys into the deep sea. The killer whale panicked at that time. They wanted to struggle, But unfortunately, the giant spear squid, which was very light and easy to deal with in their eyes, had an incomparably powerful force at this time. It pulled their tails and sank directly into the deep sea. No matter how these two guys wanted to get rid of it, it was useless, and they could only gradually be swallowed up by the darkness. Looking at the two killer whales disappearing like this, the other killer whales were stunned. You must know that so far, they have only lost 2 killer whales and victory is already in their hands. But now a giant spear squid has come and they have lost 2 more. What the hell is going on? What's going on? Now these killer whales were completely stunned. For a moment, the scene was quiet for a moment. But even if they were stunned, Jiang Hai's men would not be stunned. Big Fool took advantage of this opportunity to directly rush out of the encirclement and once again seriously injured a killer whale. He joined the dolphins and fought against these killer whales. Seeing this scene, these killer whales were ready to use the method just now to encircle these guys again. Now, they still had enough whales. But at this time, suddenly, 2 sad cries sounded, and then the bodies of the 2 killer whales slowly floated up from the deep sea. There were no other wounds on these 2 killer whales except for the initial injuries, but they died just like that. They died very simply. This time, the killer whales panicked again. Killer whales were different from baleen whales, sperm whales, humpback whales, and other whales. They did not die very deep. In very deep places, the water pressure was high, and they had to float up immediately, but unfortunately, Roger would not let them float down. He kept pulling down and kept pulling down. These 2 guys were finished. Although they did not seem to have any injuries on the surface, their lungs had been crushed by the water pressure, and they could not be more dead. With the bodies of these 2 killer whales, Jiang Hai's Roger floated up to the surface again. Looking at its huge eyes, all the killer whales were a little weak. What a joke, it killed 2 adult killer whales so easily. When did the giant squid become so fierce? The smarter the guy, the more afraid of death, and these killer whales were the same. Speaking of which, killer whales did not lack food in the ocean because they could hunt more than 90% of the species in the ocean. They could eat fish, even sharks, dolphins, penguins, seabirds, seals, sea lions, and even walruses. They often hunted the cubs of sperm whales, humpback whales, and blue whales. The hunting success rate was as high as 50%. The reason why they came here was not because they were hungry and would die if they did not eat. They felt that there was delicious food here, so they came over. So now they were scared. Chapter 9:69. Now the situation of these killer whales was like a person who was a little hungry, but his family had already finished cooking, but when he passed by a house, he found that the food cooked by this family was very fragrant and looked particularly delicious. Most people's choice was to hurry home to eat, and these killer whales' choice was to rush into the house and drive the owner away so that they could eat, but now they found that the owner of the house had a gun on his waist, so they had to be scared. But even though they were scared, Jiang Hai's men were not scared. Seeing that these killer whales were not moving, and Roger had also come up, Big Fool rushed to these guys with the dolphins. Most of the killer whales saw these guys rushing over, and the first thing they wanted to do was run, but at the critical moment, the leader began to shout again. Hearing their leader's cry, these killer whales hesitated a little, but they didn't know if it was because of Roger's wisdom that he could see that these killer whales had a leader, or if he was just a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. When he attacked again, he directly grabbed the tails of 3 killer whales, and one of them was the leader's. Squeak, squeak, squeak. In the constant screams of the leader, Roger spat out the water in his stomach and quickly sank into the deep sea. Seeing that their leader was finished, these killer whales also fully demonstrated the principle of dying friends. They turned their heads and quickly rushed in the direction they came from. Seeing these guys escape, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and smile softly. But thinking of the dolphins sacrificed, Jiang Hai was a little sad. To be honest, this was the first time Jiang Hai's navy was hurt, and the first time they were hurt, a dolphin died, which also made him see that the security of his fishery was still not good enough. If it was a shark, then the dolphin would not be a problem, but now it was a whale, and the dolphin would be a little weak. Now, it was still a killer whale. What if it was a sperm whale that came one day? What about Jianghai? He had to think about these things carefully. After their leader was taken away, the killer whales quickly retreated. Soon, the bodies of the 3 killer whales also floated to the sea level, and then slowly sank to the bottom of the sea. They all died because their lungs were crushed by the water pressure, so they would not float on the sea for long before sinking. At this time, a large number of fish had gathered beside the bodies of these whales. For the fish in Jianghai's manor, this was an out-and-out feast. Sometimes nature was so ironic. The hunter in the previous second would become the prey of his prey in the next second. However, Big Dumb and the others didn't take a share of the spoils. The death of a dolphin made them very sad. Many dolphins even floated to the surface of the water and began to mourn. It was as if they were sending off the dead dolphin. Seeing this scene, Jianghai couldn't do anything but sigh. He turned and walked into the cabin and took out a piece of beef that was frozen in the refrigerator. What he could do now was to replenish these guys' lost physical strength and recover from their injuries. Yes, although it seemed that Jianghai's Marines didn't suffer any injuries, but some injuries were inevitable. Big Dumb had 7 or 8 wounds on his body. Although the wounds weren't deep, they were still bleeding. In this piece of beef, Jianghai injected 4 auras into it. This was also his rare generosity. Then he cut the beef with aura into more than a dozen pieces and took them out. Big Dumb, his wife, and each dolphin were given a piece. At the same time, the biggest piece was given to Roger. If it weren't for him today, Jianghai's manor would be miserable. I don't want to hear about today's matter under any circumstances. Looking at these guys sinking to the bottom of the sea again after feeding them the beef, Jianghai also said to the fishermen behind him. Now, including Edward Anderson, they couldn't understand why those dolphins, sharks, and the giant squid would help Jianghai. They really couldn't understand, but even if they couldn't understand, it doesn't mean that they have to talk about these things. After hearing Jianghai's words, they naturally nodded. After all, they don't want to lose their jobs in Jianghai's manor, including those newcomers. They clearly saw how much money Edward Anderson made last year. It's impossible for them not to be envious, especially now that they know that Jianghai is about to buy another batch of economic fish. They won't leave even if he drives them away. After this matter subsided, Edward Anderson restarted the engine and headed in the direction of the dock. But on the way back, everyone was silent, especially Jianghai, who has been sitting on the bow, looking at the wind and waves in front of him. He didn't care about the water droplets splashing on his body. He just sat there with his chin in his hand. He was really in a bad mood. After returning home, he wasn't in the mood to play with Chi Jie and the others. After briefly telling them about the situation at the fishery, these girls also knew that it wasn't the time to play. They obediently washed up and returned to the manor. In the evening, Jianghai didn't do any exercise. Instead, he directly hugged Feng Yinshun, Ai Xiaoxi, Sheila, and Ashiria, who should be on shift tonight, and went to sleep. Soon, the 4 girls fell asleep. Jianghai kept looking at the ceiling, thinking about how to increase the combat effectiveness of his side. In Jianghai's hometown, there's been a saying that only a dog can kill a dog. Of course, that's what that saying means. What he has to do now is to strengthen the defense of his own sea and to deal with marine giants such as killer whales, sperm whales, and humpback whales. Jianghai's first thought was killer whales, but this idea just emerged and was thrown out by Jianghai. It's not because he killed a lot of killer whales today. He is not so narrow-minded. It's because after he came back, he specifically checked this kind of creature. This kind of creature can eat too much. An adult killer whale, weighing 9 tons, eats at least 4% of its own weight in food a day, or even more. 4% of 9 tons is 360 kilograms. Jianghai calculated that half of this 360 kilograms belongs to his own fishery, which is 180 kilograms of fish. Based on Jianghai's $50 per kilogram of fish, raising a killer whale, even if he let it eat half of its food a day and come back to eat the other half, it will cost him $9,000. If it eats all in Jianghai's territory, It will cost him 18,000 US dollars. Of course, it is impossible to raise one killer whale. The food cost of 10 per day is 180,000 US dollars, which is 7 million US dollars a year. Zhang Hai is actually a prodigal. Even if he is a prodigal, it is absolutely impossible for him to spend more than 60 million US dollars to raise so many killer whales, not to mention that they may not only eat 50 US dollars. And with the nourishment of spiritual energy, they will not only weigh 9 tons. So after thinking for a long time, Zhang Hai felt that he would go bankrupt if he raised 10 killer whales. So he directly threw the idea to the back of his mind. Since there is no way to raise killer whales, he will have to raise something else. In addition to the killer whale, the second animal Zhang Hai thought of was the great white shark. Compared with the killer whale, the great white shark is smaller and much lighter. Its combat power is not much worse, but it is too stupid, so it naturally eats much less. The great white shark is different from ordinary sharks. Ordinary sharks, such as Big Fool, are cold-blooded fish. The great white shark is not a completely cold-blooded fish. It is a semi-thermal animal, so although it is not like Big Fool, which can eat a full meal for 2 months, it often eats a meal for half a month. Even if it eats all day, the amount of food it eats is about 1/6% of its own weight. An adult great white shark is about 3,200 kilograms. According to 3 tons, the amount of food it eats a day is only 48 kilograms. All of the fish it preys on Zhang Hai will cost $2,400 a day and $876,000 a year. If it raises 10, it will cost about $9 million. Compared with $7 million a year, this is less than 1/6. It is still within Zhang Hai's acceptable range, but there is one point. First, this thing is not so easy to deal with and is more dangerous. Second, because this creature itself is not smart, it takes a long time to raise, but this is also a way. Thinking of the great white shark, he thought of cold-blooded animals. Thinking of cold-blooded animals, Zhang Hai thought of his giant spear squid and sea serpent, but the sea serpent gave up after thinking about it. Zhang Hai will not put this kind of thing in a sea area. Although this kind of thing is not aggressive, and it doesn't eat much, it can grow very big with Zhang Hai's aura. But there's a problem. What if the fishermen bring these things up, and they are bitten? Everything is based on people, so Zhang Hai will not raise sea serpents. Now it seems that the best way should not be the giant spear squid and the great white shark. With a plan in mind, Zhang Hai's eyes narrowed. Now what he has to figure out is where to get these things. He knows the sea area in his home, so there should be no such thing. But Zhang Hai is not worried about the specific place because don't forget, although he doesn't know, it is impossible for the old fishermen like Edward Anderson to not know. He will ask them tomorrow. There is probably no place that Edward Anderson doesn't know. Of course, Zhang Hai refers to the sea, not the land. After putting down his thoughts, Zhang Hai also fell asleep. Not long after, he also fell asleep. The busy day is over. Chapter 970. Hey, Edward here. Zhang Hai waved his hand and called out to Edward Anderson, who had just walked down from the dock. Because there was a copy last night, Zhang Hai got up early in the morning because Edward Anderson and the others would come back at this time. The fish were all caught at night, and then they would be transported to the dock in Boston before dawn. Then the people from the Tunglong Company and the high-end restaurants in Boston would gather there. The people from Walmart sent by Prowalton would tell the people from the Tunglong Company what fish they wanted today and where they were going to send it. Then the people from the Tunglong Company would transport the seafood, either chilled or frozen, directly to the airport, and then fly straight to the place they agreed on, where the people from the Walmart Company would be waiting to pick up the goods. Edward Anderson and the others would return directly, and the money would be directly transferred to Zhang Hai's account. Generally speaking, when they arrived home, it was around 6 o'clock. If it was summer, the sky would be bright, but it was still winter, and the sky was not even bright. The sea was covered with fog, and only a trace of sunlight could be seen. Don't think that you can see the sunrise often just because you live by the sea all year round. To be honest, it's just like in the mountains. The time you can see the sunrise is very little because whether it's in the sea or in the mountains, the fog is very heavy. Jiang Hai had been here for more than 3 years. The number of sunrises he had seen could not be counted with his hands, but the number of times he had seen them was not too many. Basically, it was good to see the sunrise 1 or 2 days a month. Obviously, today was not such a day. "Hey boss, you're up so early." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also said with a smile, and then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled and waved his hand. The two walked into the hut next to the dock. In this day, it was still quite challenging to stay outside, and it was far less comfortable than in a heated room. Some people said that Jiang Hai was a loser. When he was rich, he was a super loser. If Jiang Hai heard these words, he would say, "How can you tell?" Ahem. Well, in fact, Jiang Hai was a super loser. If he had the slightest ambition and drive, he could also rely on his ability to make more money and have more influence, but he didn't. I asked you to come here for one thing. Do you know where there are many sharks around us? Especially great white sharks, king squid, or giant spear squid. After pulling Edward Anderson into the hut, Jiang Hai also went straight to the point and asked him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson hesitated for a moment. He knew where there were many great white sharks, and he also understood that Jiang Hai had some special abilities which were far from what he could understand. However, he had to think about the giant spear squid because he really didn't know. I remember that there used to be a lot of great white sharks there, almost 30 or 40 of them, but after some were killed, they have rarely been seen recently, but I can be sure that there must be some there. As for the giant spear squid, king squid, boss, I really don't know. Looking at Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson first said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled awkwardly. In fact, he also took some things for granted. King squid, giant spear squid. These are all creatures living at the bottom of the sea. They don't need to breathe. Why would they come up? So not many people have seen them. But sperm whales feed on these things. Where there are sperm whales, there should be these creatures. But after thinking about it, Edward Anderson still suggested to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, he can't find these guys, but it doesn't mean that other creatures can't find them, right? At least sperm whales, the natural enemy of squid, should not be a big problem. But where to find sperm whales, Jiang Hai also has some entanglements. Sperm whales are everywhere. As long as the water is not frozen, there will be traces of them. It's not difficult to find them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also nodded. It's a good thing to find them. Now he is afraid of another killer whale invasion. So now that he has determined sharks first, he will look for sharks first. As for the giant spear squid, it depends on the situation. Okay, then let's find a chance to go to Cape Cod soon. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai said to Edward Anderson. Hearing that Jiang Hai was going to Cape Cod, Edward Anderson naturally didn't care and nodded directly. But if they want to go to Cape Cod, Jiang Hai and the others have to hurry because it's going to be March soon. Jiang Hai will start to get busy, and there will be very few people who can leave by then. The fishermen need to start putting in the fry, and the land needs to start planting vegetables, tidying up lawns, and grazing cattle. At that time, Jiang Hai will have no extra manpower to accompany him to Cape Cod. Although Azalina and the others can accompany Jiang Hai all the time, there is a problem. You can let Azalina kill people, but how can you let her catch sharks? Haha, I'm thinking too much. This matter should be handled by Edward Anderson. After making the reservation with Edward Anderson, Jiang Hai went back and thought about it. He decided to go after Robbins Garcia and the others returned. Why must they wait for him to come back? This time, Jiang Hai was going to take Knerson Peters, Harriman Fells, Bell Lester, and Edward Anderson with him. Bell Lester was in charge of safety. Edward Anderson was in charge of finding ways to get fish, while the other two were in charge of catching fish. At this time, it was indeed a little inconvenient to bring some women along. Most importantly, Cape Cod was not far away. It was less than an hour's boat ride from the border of Jiang Hai's fishing ground. Don't forget that Jiang Hai expanded his fishing ground last year. This time, Jiang Hai was going to drive his own yacht. It had been a while since his yacht was used. After all, it cost Jiang Hai more than $5 million. It didn't seem good to just leave it there. After Jiang Hai made the decision, he waited for Robbins Garcia and the others to come back. Edward Anderson also had to arrange the rotation of the fishermen during his absence. As for Jiang Hai's women, they didn't care too much. After all, Jiang Hai was only going to Cape Cod, which was very close. Jiang Hai would be back in 2 or 3 days. They wouldn't go so far as to stop Jiang Hai from going for 2 or 3 days. Moreover, according to Jiang Hai, this was a serious matter. Time passed day by day. After another 4 days, Robbins Garcia and the others came back. They went with 2 cows, but when they came back, they only had 1 shorthorn cow and a medal. Needless to say, the medal was still a gold medal. In first place, Jiang Hai's beef cow had no problem beating these guys. As for the cow, it also won a gold medal, but its ranking wasn't particularly high. After all, Jiang Hai had only reared it for 1 winter, not more than a year. Even so, Jiang Hai's milk still made a name for itself. Because purely based on the nutritional content, Jiang Hai's milk was worthy of being number 1. The cows in Australia and the cows in the Netherlands were not as nutritious as Jiang Hai's shorthorn cow. After all, the grass that the shorthorn cow ate was rich in aura. However, perhaps because it had only been reared for a short time, the taste of the milk wasn't very good. Therefore, although it also won a gold medal, its ranking wasn't particularly high. As for the beef cow, it was bound to beat everything. According to Robbins Garcia, they were actually having a smooth sailing. This year's San Antonio Livestock Show also had Japanese people participating. Naturally, they were also suppressed by Jiang Hai. However, those Japanese people were indeed very wretched. At first, they sent people to cause trouble, giving the cows chin and croton beans, but they were directly beaten by Harriman Fells and then thrown into the police station. Later, they also encouraged the American cowboys to ask why these cows were so good. According to them, they were also rearing cows. Why could Jiang Hai's cows be sold at such a high price? It was unfair. However, their plan didn't succeed because the most unfair thing was the beef cow. They didn't see Japan publicizing this method of raising beef. In addition, the United States was a country that paid attention to human rights and democracy, so such a thing didn't happen. Therefore, after dealing with these bastards along the way, they also brought back 2 gold medals for Jiang Hai. After Harriman Fells returned, Jiang Hai let him rest for 2 days. Then, he took the 4 people he had chosen to his yacht and drove directly to Cape Cod. These days, he was afraid that the killer whales would return. Whether it was the fishery or the land, Jiang Hai was quite interested in them. The most important thing was that he was a person with no sense of security. These days, when his girls flirted with him, he was in a bad mood, let alone doing other things. Harriman Fells also knew that Jiang Hai was anxious, so after 2 days of rest, Jiang Hai waved his hand and he followed him on the boat without any complaints. Because the place they were going to this time wasn't very far, Jiang Hai and the others prepared everything and had breakfast before leaving. Edward Anderson was the captain. He started the engine and rushed in the direction of Cape Cod. Chapter 971. Fishing, of course, did not refer to a specific place or law enforcement method, but it should be considered an outdoor sport. No one knew exactly how many years fishing had been around, but it was at least tens of thousands of years ago. At least before human civilization, fishing with rods and fishing had already existed. The most famous one was during the last years of the Shang dynasty. There was a man named Lu Wang who used a straight hook to fish. He only caught nobles and generals. Later, this man was given the surname Jiang because of his achievements. He was the famous Jiang Zia. Yes, Jiang Zia's surname was not Jiang but Lu. Jiang was one of the most ancient and noble surnames in Huaxia, because the origin of this surname was Shennong, the legendary Yan Emperor. The Yan Emperor was born in Jiang River, so he used the river as his surname and named himself Jiang. Of course, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, and, as far as he knew, it had nothing to do with a certain author. He was just trying to count the number of words. No matter what, Fishing was a skill passed down from ancient humans, and there were many people who had fished. Basically, taking China as an example, out of the 3 billion people, at least one-third of them had fished before. Children who were born in the countryside or grew up in the countryside must have fished before. Those who were born in the city must have gone to fishing ponds, reservoirs, and so on to play, and almost all of them had fished before. Although there were many people who had fished before, there were not many who really liked it. In all of Huaxia, 1 out of 100 people liked fishing, and that was about it. Don't think that this was a small proportion. One had to know that there were 3 billion people in Huaxia, and 1 out of 100 people liked fishing. That was 13 million people. The base of the country was too large, and no one could do anything about it. However, if 1 out of 100 people in Huaxia liked fishing, then the United States, maybe 1,000, or 3,000, or 5,000. Well, to be honest, there were not many people in the United States who liked fishing. As everyone knew, although the American government had been trying to change the eating habits of the American people to eliminate the overabundance of Asian carp in the river, the Americans just didn't eat it. No one could do anything about it. First, the United States was like Huaxia. In order to develop, they polluted a large area of land and water. Now that they had developed to a bottleneck, they could no longer develop quickly. They started to treat land pollution, air pollution, and water pollution. However, it had only been 20 to 30 years. Although the results were good now, the current middle-aged people knew how serious the pollution was back then. Because they were still young at that time, the middle-aged and old people would definitely not eat the fish in the river. In their eyes, it was polluted. Secondly, Americans don't like to eat fish with bones. If that's the case, people will say that all fish have bones. But in fact, if you take a closer look at American restaurants, you will understand that fish can also have no bones. This was because Americans didn't cook fish like Huaxia. They didn't fry it, stew it, or braise it. When Americans ate fish, they only ate fish steaks, fish balls, and the like. In other words, if a fish was cut from the left and the right, they would only eat the 2 pieces of meat. They would not eat the head or tail of the fish. Most river fish had bones, but many sea fish did not, such as cod, so they did not eat river fish. It was because of these 2 reasons that Americans didn't eat river fish. If someone beat the river fish into fish balls, they would eat it. However, they were worried that the fish meat was not clean, whether there was preservative in the fish balls, how long it had been stored, and so on. So to avoid these troubles, they decided not to eat river fish. If there wasn't a need, there wouldn't be a market. This was because no one ate river fish. So even if someone fished for river fish, it was just for fun. After catching a fish, they would throw it directly into the trash. But after playing for a long time, it was indeed meaningless. They still had to work. So in the United States, almost no one fished by the river. Just like hunting in the United States, fishing also required a license. Otherwise, if you were caught, you would go to jail. With these 2 conditions, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that there were very few people fishing in the United States. There were many people fishing by the sea. They would eat the fish they caught, but how many people lived by the sea? Most importantly, the income of Americans is quite high, and the price of sea fish is not very high in the United States. Under such circumstances, how many people know how to fish? There was a saying in the NBA. If a person didn't enter the playoffs or was eliminated from the playoffs, it was said that he went fishing. This was because in their view, fishing was equivalent to going on vacation. In the United States, there was only one kind of person who really worked hard to fish. This kind of person was called the ocean hunter by Edward Anderson. However, in the eyes of Jiang Hai and the others, they were fishermen. But this kind of fisherman was different from ordinary fishermen. Ordinary fishermen would buy a boat, either near or far, near their home or in the ocean. They would pull the net around and then come back to sell it. This was the traditional fisherman's way of doing things. As for these sea hunters, they were specialized in fishing. What they were eyeing were the precious fishes. For example, the legendary Atlantic bluefin marlin. Of course, yellowfin, masu, big eye, and so on were not rejected by them. Every country had a limited time for tuna fishing. For example, In Canada, it was from August to October every year. The United States and Canada had always been in the same boat, so the time was about the same. Although Huaxia didn't have a specific time for tuna fishing, there was a sea ban every year from spring to autumn. This was the time for the fish in the sea to recuperate. Naturally, fishing was not allowed, but for some small countries, there was no such rule. For example, some countries in Japan and Southeast Asia could catch tuna all year round. As long as they were found in the sea, they could be caught. Mexico, which was the closest country to the United States, could catch tuna from January to November. The only time for them to recuperate was in December every year. Therefore, many ocean hunters drifted around during the year. They would stay in one country for a few months, and the next few months, they would go to another country. For them, as long as they could catch tuna, they could go anywhere, and their income was much higher than the average fisherman. Think about it. If one day they were lucky and caught an Atlantic bluefin marlin, it didn't need to be too big. It was more than 200 kilograms. Different parts of the Atlantic bluefin marlin had different prices. If they had to talk about the average price, it would be about $300 per kilogram. Of course, this referred to the price in the United States. If they went to China and Japan, the price would fly. The cheeks of a top-notch tuna in China were the best meat for 3,800 renminbi per tail, 20 taels per kilogram, and 76,000 renminbi per kilogram. In Japan, a tuna could be sold for millions of RMB or even tens of millions of RMB. The premise was that you had to be big enough. But basically, it was not a problem to catch an Atlantic bluefin marlin and sell it for $50,000 to $60,000. In addition to the other Atlantic bluefin marlin, the average annual income of these ocean hunters was at least $100,000. Moreover, they did not only catch Atlantic bluefin marlin. They also caught bluefin, sailfish, and so on. Therefore, the annual income of these ocean hunters was about $150,000 or more. In the United States, $50,000 was considered middle class. $150,000 was enough to attract a large number of people into this industry. But there were some problems in this industry. First, it depended on one's looks. You might earn $300,000 a year, or you might not earn a single cent. You might even have to pay for plane tickets and gas. So, the average income of the two of you would be $150,000 each. Secondly, it was not very safe. Japan was only a small place, and there were too many people catching fish. No one would go there. They would go to the high seas to catch fish. As for the other places, whether it was Southeast Asia or Mexico, there was no guarantee that if you sold Atlantic bluefin marlin, you would not be robbed on the way. Many people died in this industry every year, but no one could do anything about it. Humans die in pursuit of wealth, and birds die in pursuit of food. This was an eternal truth, and it was precisely because of this that many ocean hunters specifically stared at some safe places, such as Cape Cod and George Shoals in North America. Speaking of Cape Cod, it was a place that had a close relationship with the United States. This was because it was the first stop for European immigrants in America. Without this place, there would not be the United States or Canada. It was not an exaggeration to say that. It was not the season to catch tuna, so when Zhang Hai's ship arrived, the place was a little deserted. At the port of Woods Hole, when Zhang Hai's cruise ship sailed in, many people who were drying their fishing nets on the dock looked at Zhang Hai and his ship. Many young men and women's eyes were filled with envy and hope. Cape Cod was located in the gap between Massachusetts and New York. Politically, it belonged to Massachusetts, but it was precisely because of this that it wasn't very rich. Although it wasn't as prosperous as the legend said, the per capita income here wasn't high in Massachusetts. As the saying went, poor hills and turbulent rivers produce unruly people. Although the people here weren't unruly, there were many who wished to leave this place and yearned for the outside world. As Zhang Hai's yacht docked on the shore of the dock, many teenagers deliberately came over and surrounded it. They were waiting to tie the mooring rope, which was also their main way of collecting tips. Chapter 972. Catch. Zhang Hai picked a kid who looked more pleasing to the eye and threw the boat's rope over. The guy immediately caught the rope and firmly tied it to a pole in the distance. As the rope was tightened, Zhang Hai's boat slowly approached. As Edward Anderson anchored the boat here, Zhang Hai and the others also walked down the stairs. Because the boat must be guarded, only 3 people came down. Zhang Hai, Edward Anderson, and Knerson Peters. Bell Lester and Harriman Fell stayed on the boat. "Good job, young man." After getting off the boat, Zhang Hai saw the kid who was standing in the distance, rubbing his hands and helping him tie up the boat. Of course, he also knew the rules. He pulled out an Andrew Jackson, $20 bill from his pocket and stuffed it into the kid's hand. Looking at the tip Zhang Hai gave, the kid was so happy that his nose was about to burst. "Thank you, sir," he shouted excitedly as he stuffed the money into his pocket. "You deserve it. By the way, can you tell me where the best hotel in town is?" Looking at the kid's excited face, Zhang Hai said with a smile, "Come with me, sir." Hearing that Zhang Hai still had something to ask of him, the kid patted his chest and then led Zhang Hai to the town. Cape Cod was not far from Zhang Hai's home. If he took a speedboat, it would take about 3 hours to get there. If it was a fishing boat, it would take nearly 6 hours. Zhang Hai's yacht was slightly slower than a speedboat, but it was much faster, so it took about 3 hours to get there. This place was about 30 nautical miles away from his fishing ground. If it was an ordinary fishing boat, it would take more than an hour to get there, but Zhang Hai's yacht could not be used. Following the child, Zhang Hai quickly walked into the town. The town's buildings were quite old. There were no high-rise buildings, nor were there any scenes of heavy traffic. The entire town looked very old. The buildings in the town had a strong Gothic feeling. Of course, before coming, Edward Anderson had already told Zhang Hai that the buildings in the town could actually be regarded as cultural relics. Because the buildings in the town were basically built when Europeans immigrated to the United States. Cape Cod was originally called Cape Cod. Of course, it was still called Cape Cod now. Cape Cod was just a nickname. This place was first discovered in 1602. It was discovered by a fisherman. Well, the official name was Gosnold, an explorer. However, no one thought about why Gosnold had a ship full of cod. Regardless of whether it was to flatter these people or not, it was named Cape Cod because of that ship of cod. Later, in 1620, a group of murderers, pagans, and people who couldn't live anymore arrived here on the Mayflower. When there were people here, they naturally had to build houses. So, the pagans built these buildings with a strong Gothic style. Gothic architecture originated during the European Renaissance. It started in the 12th century and disappeared in the 16th century. During that time, Gothic architecture was no longer popular in Europe. The emerging forces even gave it a derogatory term, Gothic architecture. Yes, Gothic was the original name, and Goth was a derogatory term. So, if someone went to Europe and pointed at some buildings in France and said that they were Gothic architecture, they would probably be beaten. The town of Woodstock wasn't big, but there were about 400 people living there. Nearly 1/3 of the people living on the island were ocean hunters. Only 1/10 of this 1/3 of people would stay on the island all year round. As for the rest of the young people, they would not take the initiative to come back except during the months of August to October every year. The main income of this town came from tourism. After all, this was the birthplace of the United States. So every year, people would come here to take pictures and leave a memento. But because this place really wasn't that big, and there were more than 10 towns on Cod that had similar customs, it really wasn't that rich. But for this only source of income, they still insisted on the style of small town. Well, in Zhang Hai's eyes, a cloudy day would look very gloomy. For Huaxia people, a Gothic style wasn't it the style of a haunted house or a haunted house? Well, Zhang Hai seemed to be wrong again, but he really didn't know much about this. Following the boy in front of him, Zhang Hai walked all the way to the middle of the town. There was a small square in the middle of the town, and in the middle of the square was a dried-up fountain. Around the square should be the town's business center. There were several hotels and bars. In the distant alley, there were some professional places where only men would go. It wasn't rare in America. When he brought Zhang Hai here, the boy excitedly pointed at the 3-story building called Toby George's Hotel in front of him and smiled at Zhang Hai. Needless to say, this should be the place. Sorry to trouble you. As he spoke, Jiang Hai gave him another $10 and then walked into the hotel. When he walked in, the first thing he saw was a hall similar to a bar and a staircase going upstairs. At this time, there were about 5 or 6 figures in the bar, divided into 3 groups. 2 tables were sitting at a table far away. When they heard Jiang Hai and the others coming in, they glanced at Jiang Hai, then turned their heads, indicating that they were not interested in Jiang Hai. Hello, welcome. Do you want to eat, drink, or stay? The other person was a fat old man who was sitting in front of the bar watching TV. He had a cigarette in his mouth while talking to Jiang Hai and the others. But before Jiang Hai spoke, Edward Anderson said with a smile, Hey, Toby. Huh? AI Hua. I haven't seen you for a while. Hearing Edward Anderson's voice, the fat man couldn't help but turn his head in confusion. When he saw that it was Edward Anderson, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. That's right. I thought you were going to close down. Edward Anderson walked over and shook hands with the man, then patted him on the shoulder and said to him. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, the fat man, named Toby, also laughed. Obviously, he didn't care about Edward Anderson's joke. They often joke like this many years ago. Don't worry. Before I die, this place will always be open for business. Are you here to stay, or to have a meal, or just to visit an old friend? Looking at Edward Anderson, Toby asked with a smile. Both. I'm here to stay, eat, and visit an old friend. Hearing Toby's words, Edward Anderson also said with a smile, then took the initiative to step back and introduce Toby to his boss, Jiang Hai. Toby, this is my boss, Jiang Hai from Huaxia, Mr. Jiang. Hearing Edward Anderson introduce himself, Jiang Hai also said hello, then extended his hand. Boy, I've heard of you. I hope you have a good time here. How many rooms do you want, and how many nights do you want to stay? After shaking hands with Jiang Hai, Toby also said with a smile. In Massachusetts, there weren't many coastal residents who hadn't heard of Jiang Hai. Let's get 3 rooms, 1 room with 1 bed, 2 rooms with 2 beds. The specific length of stay hasn't been decided yet, but I still need to trouble you to prepare some food for us while you tidy up the rooms. Hearing Toby's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile, which was also what he and Edward Anderson had discussed on the boat just now. Jiang Hai and the others had a total of 5 people. Naturally, Jiang Hai had to live on the shore every day. Although the sea wasn't particularly shaky, it was still shaky. He was the boss, so he had the right to live on the shore. As for the remaining 4 people, they would swap beds in pairs. Today, 2 people would get off the boat, and the next day, another 2 people would get off the boat. Americans don't like to sleep in other people's beds. They are more particular about privacy, so Jiang Hai specifically asked for 2 beds. Okay, no problem. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Toby also responded with a smile. Chow Wei, you lazy bastard, immediately tidy up the 3 best rooms for me. 1 room with 1 bed, 2 rooms with 2 beds. Guests are here, and you haven't done anything for so long. I'll fire you sooner or later. George, my old friend, AI Dawaz brought his boss over. Prepare a few dishes to greet them. Take a seat first. After Toby's voice fell, he directly shouted toward the 2nd floor. Hearing his shout, a sound came from the 2nd floor, followed by the sound of footsteps running quickly to the 3rd floor and starting to get busy. The kitchen also responded. Jiang Hai didn't feel uncomfortable with such a rough arrangement. He felt that it was best to not treat him as an outsider. Edward Anderson naturally knew Jiang Hai's habits, so he smiled and led Jiang Hai to an empty table. Boss, you could try old George's pineapple chicken with codfish in a while. The taste definitely won't disappoint you. After everyone sat down, Edward Anderson also said to Jiang Hai with a smile, Ai Dahua, since you know this place, why didn't you just bring us here? Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai smiled, but then asked with some doubts. He had to spend $10 more. Hey, Jiang, you're the boss. You decide where we are, not anyone else. But after hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson said seriously. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai smiled. He likes such subordinates. Chapter 973. Not long after, A man wearing a greasy chef's coat came out of the kitchen with some food in his hand. "This is George. He opened this hotel with Toby. Toby paid for it. He used to be a chef, so he is responsible for cooking. Although he doesn't have any stars, the food he cooks is quite delicious." Seeing George coming out with food, Edward Anderson smiled and introduced him to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked at George's hand. George didn't prepare a meal for Jiang Hai. In fact, there weren't many people in the United States who were so particular about food, especially when eating these dry pieces of meat. If it was some soup, perhaps it would be separated. But when eating vegetables, there was not so much attention. The first thing that caught Jiang Hai's eyes was the so-called George's specialty dish, pineapple chicken and cod steak. The cooking method was very simple. The cod steak was fried, and the pineapple chicken was fried. Then, they were placed on the plate. Next to them were two sauces. One was ketchup, and the other was sweet and spicy sauce. Of course, the secret was the pickling process. After the food was served, Jiang Hai picked up a fork and ate a piece. After chewing, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. As expected of an experienced chef, his control of the fire was really strong. The chicken and fish steak were a little crispy on the outside, but very soft on the inside. The juices in the meat were perfectly controlled. It didn't taste dry, but it was chewy, and the skin was very crispy. To be honest, Jiang Hai's taste was not much different from a child's. This kind of crispy and soft on the inside was his favorite. Together with the sweet and spicy sauce, the taste was quite good. Seeing Jiang Hai nod, old George also smiled and went back to work. After having a good lunch, Jiang Hai specially packed for 2 people. Don't forget that there were still 2 people on the ship. After delivering the food to them, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the small hotel and went into their own rooms. On the 3rd floor of the hotel, Jiang Hai and the others also saw Toby, the one who kept saying that he wanted to fire Cha away. After Jiang Hai gave him a tip of $20, he went into his room. Although the hotel looked a bit shabby from the outside, Jiang Hai didn't mind at all. But after all, it was a tourist town and a summer city. Therefore, the hotel was quite good. The room was very big, and everything was very complete. There was heating, air conditioning. Of course, the current air conditioning could not be used. The bathroom was also very clean. There was a sofa, tables and chairs, a TV, and a big bed. Jiang Hai took a small nap here in the afternoon. After all, it was impossible not to feel dizzy after being on the ship for a few hours. It was good to adjust now. Before nightfall, Jiang Hai woke up and went downstairs to meet with Edward Anderson and the others. They had dinner in the hall, but then Edward Anderson took them to a nearby bar. They were not going there to have fun, but to ask for information. Creatures like great white sharks were not like tigers and lions on land. They had a fixed territory. Great white sharks ran around everywhere. As long as there was water, they would be there. Therefore, they would often run into them when you didn't want to, and when you wanted to find them, they couldn't be found. Now, they were going to the bar to ask if there were any great white sharks nearby. Although they were sure that there must be great white sharks nearby, because this was Cape Cod. There were a lot of fish here. Where there was food, there must be predators, so there must be great white sharks here. However, it would be interesting to look for them at sea level. Where could they find them? This thing was not a whale that could spray water. It was quite troublesome to find the dorsal fin, so it was quite good to ask around and determine the specific location. Boss, go to the bar counter and ask around. I'll see if I know any old friends and ask them. After walking to the door of the bar, Edward Anderson deliberately said something to Jiang Hai, and the 3 walked into the bar. After entering the bar, Jiang Hai also nodded secretly. He was quite used to the environment here. Although it was called a bar, it was different from a disco. This was the kind of country bar. Like old Tony's cowboy song, it played more retro country music. Listening to these strange music that was not too noisy, Jiang Hai was not uncomfortable. He nodded along with the music and brought Knursen Peters to the bar counter. What would you like to drink? The little guy at the bar counter saw Jiang Hai coming over, raised his head, wiped the glass in his hand, and asked Jiang Hai. He used to entertain tourists often, so he was very familiar with this process, but now was not the time for tourists, so he was still a little surprised by Jiang Hai's arrival. "A glass of whiskey, Knursen Peters. What do you want?" Hearing the bartender's words, Jiang Hai asked Knursen Peters. "Beer is fine. I still have to protect you." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Knursen Peters said in a muffled voice. The reason why Jiang Hai brought him and Harriman Fells out this time was, firstly, because of their strength, and secondly, because of their loyalty to Jiang Hai. In this group, if Bell Lester had a 5% chance of betraying Jiang Hai and Edward Anderson had a 3% chance of betraying Jiang Hai, then these two people may not even have a 1% chance. This is also Jiang Hai's confidence. "A glass of whiskey, a glass of beer." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Then the waiter over there poured a third of a glass of whiskey for Jiang Hai, put 3 ice cubes in it, and poured a glass of raw beer. Small shops like this all brewed their own beer. Their beer was not imported, so the taste of each shop's beer was different. In the United States, there was a group of people who liked to drink beer, and they would look for small shops like this to drink beer from all over the country. Jiang Hai took the whiskey and then stuffed a $20 bill into the box next to him. According to the price of such a small shop, a glass of whiskey was about $5 or $6, and a glass of beer was about $2 or $3. In the United States, tips were basically 10% or 20%. For someone like Jiang Hai who directly gave double the tip, he must be inquiring about something. These waiters were still very used to it. Seeing Jiang Hai give him $20, the waiter propped himself up and looked at Jiang Hai, waiting for him to ask a question. "Excuse me, which part of the sea has more great white sharks?" Jiang Hai asked the waiter after taking a sip of the whiskey. "That thing runs around all day long, and no one knows where it is. However, the fishing grounds of the Soaring Dragon Manor are about 30 nautical miles away from here. The fish there are quite delicious, so occasionally, some great white sharks will wander around Jiang Hai's fishing grounds in order to catch fish that accidentally come out of the fishing grounds. If you follow that line, you may see great white sharks, but you have to pay attention to the people of the Soaring Dragon Manor. They're very strict about their own territory. If you're discovered, then you have to run away quickly. Their water cannons won't be merciful." Hearing Jiang Hai's question, the waiter didn't care. After all, there were people who came to see great white sharks every year, and he just casually mentioned it. However, after hearing his words, Jiang Hai was somewhat embarrassed. Hearing someone else say that he had to be careful of his manner made him feel a little strange, even though it wasn't anything good. "Thank you." However, even if it wasn't anything good, the waiter was kind, so Jiang Hai still thanked him and continued to drink. Not long after, Edward Anderson also came back. The news he heard was similar to what Jiang Hai heard. He also said that great white sharks might be seen around Jiang Hai's fishing grounds. As for why these sharks didn't enter the fishing grounds, others may not know, but Jiang Hai certainly knew. It was because of Big Fool. Big Fool was now bigger than the average killer whale. The general size of a great white shark was about 6 meters. Compared with Big Fool, who was almost 10 meters tall, it was really a lot worse. Big Fool and his wife, 2 sharks, and a dozen dolphins wandered in that sea area. These great white sharks couldn't beat them, but they were reluctant to leave. Naturally, they could only wander around nearby. In addition, great white sharks were stupid enough. They didn't have any social awareness. Like killer whales, they were all lone wolves. If they encountered great white sharks, even without Big Fool, they would have to determine the winner first. Therefore, although these great white sharks were powerful, in the eyes of Edward Anderson and Jiang Hai, they were not a force to worry about. It was also beneficial to keep this force. Just like now, didn't Jiang Hai come over to recruit them? The news brought back by Edward Anderson was almost the same as what Jiang Hai heard, so the two sat at the bar to study it. After determining the route for tomorrow, they left the bar and returned to the hotel to have a good sleep. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and Edward Anderson had breakfast, then they boarded the boat and sailed to the side of Jiang Hai's fishing grounds. Today was the day to hunt great white sharks. Maybe God also felt that Jiang Hai would have some harvest today, so there was no fog on the sea. It was a sunny day, facing the wind and waves. Jiang Hai's boat quickly sailed to the border of his fishing grounds. Chapter 974. Boss, we're here. Looking at the floating signal balls in the distance, Bell Lester put down his hand and said with a smile. Although Jiang Hai's fish farm did not have a net fence at the periphery, Edward Anderson deliberately placed some floating signal balls at the periphery to tell the fishermen that this was the border. If they dared to come over, they would be trespassing on the private fish farm. Admittedly, Edward Anderson's move was not bad. Plus, there were satellite surveillance and radio signals all day long. Some people who did not want to steal fish, or those who wanted to steal fish, but were timid, would stay away from this place. Of course, there were also some shameless people who scolded Jiang Hai for being shameless. In their eyes, the ocean belonged to everyone, and was also their home. Jiang Hai surrounded the fish farm and caught the fish himself. That was the most shameless move. What? Jiang Hai spent money to buy it? He didn't pay for it. So why did they say he bought it? There were indeed many people in the United States who had such thoughts. After all, this kind of logic and thinking was popular in this country. However, those who had such thoughts were basically honest now. Since the end of last year's naval battle, very few people dare to steal fish near Jiang Hai's waters. Even if they did, they would use small speedboats to catch fish or use hand nets to steal in the dark. The losses were very small. The most important thing was that these people did not encounter Big Fool and the others. If they were patrolling, they would definitely lose their fishing nets and rods. If they were too greedy, they might not even be able to keep their boats and people. Perhaps because Jiang Hai's fish farm was so evil, in the past 6 months or so, very few people came to fish here, giving the fish a period of time to recuperate. According to Edward Anderson, according to the ship's sonar, there were a lot of fish nearby. Although there were not as many fish as Jiang Hai's fish farm, the number was still considerable. After driving along Jiang Hai's floating line for about 5 hours, Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the head of Jiang Hai's fish farm. About 50 nautical miles to the south was the territory of New York. It was obvious that Jiang Hai's fish farm was really large. After arriving at the place, Jiang Hai and the others began to prepare. After a simple lunch, Jiang Hai and the others took out the large pieces of cow internal organs that they had prepared. The cow internal organs were freshly killed before departure, and they were frozen in the ship. Americans almost didn't eat internal organs, but they also knew that these things were quite good for fishing. Originally, internal organs had a miraculous effect when fishing. In addition, these were the internal organs of Jiang Hai's beef cattle, which contained spiritual energy, so the effect was naturally stronger. Because they were going to catch great white sharks, Jiang Hai and the others also made the internal organs of these cows big, tied them to the ship with the thickest fishing line, and then threw these internal organs into the water. Although the weather was still a little cold, the moment the internal organs were thrown into the water, countless seemingly lazy fish swarmed up and began to peck at them. Jiang Hai looked down from the bow of the ship. Wow, he had to admit that the fishing resources nearby were really good. There were all kinds of fish: barracuda, sea bass, bream, cod, herring, mackerel, shore fish, scorpion, and even some wild salmon were all pecking at the internal organs. Looking at these fish, Edward Anderson was also a little envious. He lifted the internal organs up and then threw the net down, catching 2 Atlantic salmon that were about 10 kilograms in weight. After throwing them on the ship, he cleaned up. There was finally a dish to go with wine in the evening. After digging out the internal organs, he threw the fish into the frozen storage, and then watched the fish eat the internal organs happily. Soon, this piece of internal organs was eaten up. They also knew that they couldn't rush fishing, so Edward Anderson put another piece in. This time, it should be a reward, because when the internal organs were just put in, these fish were still eating crazily, but suddenly most of the fish were stunned for a moment, and then many of them swam away quickly. In the distance, on the sea level, a dorsal fin stood up. "It's coming, be careful." Looking at the dorsal fin, Edward Anderson also said loudly, and then retreated to the ship with everyone. Jiang Hai's yacht was a large yacht with 8 rooms. It was far from something that sharks or killer whales could carry, so they were not worried about this. But if they exposed their heads, sharks would also jump. If they bit Jiang Hai, it would be troublesome. Just as Jiang Hai and the others retreated, the shark also accelerated and rushed over quickly. It went up and bit directly on the internal organs, but before it could swallow, the huge hook had already hooked its mouth. In pain, this guy also jumped out of the water and wanted to break free, but it was stuck by the barb. Good luck, the first shot hit. Looking at the shark that jumped up, Edward Anderson grinned. There were quite a lot of large shark species. In addition to the great white shark, there were many sharks, such as tiger sharks, gray mako sharks, hammerhead sharks, bull sharks, and so on. So although Jiang Hai and the others were fishing for sharks, they were not sure whether they were fishing for the great white shark they wanted. Of course, some other sharks were also possible, except for the tiger shark. Because this shark was too stupid, as long as it had a little IQ, Jiang Hai also had the possibility of domesticating it, but the brain of this shark was estimated to be similar to that of a worm. It was too stupid, and Jiang Hai had no way to domesticate it. In fact, most sharks were very stupid. Their brains were only the size of soybeans, and they lived more or less according to their instincts. Why did Jiang Hai want to catch a great white shark? It was because this shark was relatively smart, unlike tiger sharks that would swallow anything. When a great white shark attacks humans, it doesn't like to eat humans. Most of the time, it would treat humans like seals. Therefore, it would take a bite, and when it feels that something is wrong, it would let go. This can be considered as a sign of intelligence. Jiang Hai's luck was good. The first shark he caught was a typical great white shark, with a white belly, gray body, and small eyes. Edward Anderson had dealt with this creature many times. In the beginning, fishermen hated this shark because this creature would attack the fishermen, and, at the very least, it would eat the fish caught by the fishermen, causing a certain amount of losses. At the same time, it was also impossible to eat it. Sharks did not have a bladder, and once it died, its urine would enter the meat. No matter how fast you killed it, the shark's meat would have a foul smell. Therefore, no one in the West ate this kind of fish. It was not until huaxia restaurants opened all over the world that the fishermen changed their view of this kind of creature. Huaxia restaurants had ways to get rid of the fishy smell, and shark fin was a great tonic. Naturally, sharks went from an existence that was hated by others to an existence that everyone liked. Therefore, the number of these guys decreased rapidly. Although the United States did not prohibit others from hunting sharks, all huaxia restaurants, or restaurants that serve shark's fin, were not allowed to serve shark's fin alone, only whole sharks. This greatly reduced the misfortune of sharks being slaughtered. This was because no one would catch a whole shark, freeze it, and then sell it. This was really a bit difficult. In addition, environmental protection organizations were always looking for trouble. Now, except for some Japanese and African ships, there were very few people who would hunt sharks. At least, Jiang Hai, as the owner of the manor, had not eaten shark's fins seriously many times. Control it, let it jump, and consume its strength. Although Jiang Hai was a little dazed when he saw the shark in front of him, Edward Anderson was very clear-headed. He immediately pulled the thickest fishing line, and then said to Knerson Peters and Harriman Fells behind him. The two people's reactions were not slow. They immediately came over and pulled the line, one tight and one loose. When the shark was downstream, they had to release the line as much as possible. When the shark was a little annoyed and jumped out of the water, they had to pull the line back and let the shark fall back into the water again. The shark's brain was not very good, which was why they dared to do this. The first shark that Jiang Hai caught was not very big, about 3 meters long. It was still in a state of immaturity, so it was not very good in strength or endurance. In less than 20 minutes, it was finished. Edward Anderson, Knerson Peters, and Harriman Fells pulled it to the side of the boat. Then Jiang Hai came over, and everyone turned it over. When the shark turned over, it would enter a state of static. Although they did not know why, it was true. Some people said that this was because when a shark flipped over, the world it saw would be reversed. It would be very scared, and its brain would secrete a chemical component to make it fall into a coma. Some people said that this was called forced stillness. But in any case, it was indeed true. Jiang Hai looked at the shark that could not move at all except for opening its mouth to drink water. He smiled and then put his hand on its belly. As the spiritual energy in Jiang Hai's body surged, a piece of spiritual energy disappeared into Jiang Hai's body and entered the shark. In an instant, Jiang Hai felt that there was some connection between him and the shark. From today on, you'll be called Big White. Not good. There is a shall by at home, so you'll be called First White. Patting the belly of the great white shark, Jiang Hai said with a smile, his navy has expanded again. Chapter 975. Oh, you're back. How was your day? Seeing Jiang Hai walk into the hotel with Belle Lester and Harriman Ferns, old Toby couldn't help laughing and talking, and Jiang Hai also got along well with this old man after yesterday's interaction. Not bad, huh? Thinking of his harvest today, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. It's good that the harvest is good, but I have to advise you, it's better to take it easy. If you attract the Coastal Patrol or the people from the Fishery Administration, it will be troublesome. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Toby couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Hai, what does this have to do with the Fishery Administration and the Coastal Patrol? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with some doubts. Aren't you catching sharks and bluefin tuna? Hearing Jiang Hai's doubtful words and his sincere eyes, Toby couldn't help but be stunned. Then he looked at him with some doubts. Who said that? Isn't this bullshit? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai, Belle, and Harriman behind him looked at each other. Aren't you asking about where to see great white sharks? Also, this is the place where bluefin tuna is produced. Don't tell me you're just here for fun. Hearing Jiang Hai's puzzled words, Toby smiled. He felt that he was almost fooled by Jiang Hai. This guy was asking about great white sharks in the bar yesterday. Almost many people in the town know about it. This is not a secret. Asking about great white sharks, he's not just here for fun. He must have some ulterior motives. They are right. Jiang Hai does have ulterior motives, but unfortunately, they don't know what Jiang Hai is planning. Aren't you accusing us wrongly? I really have nothing to do. I live nearby, but I've never seen a great white shark before. That's why I brought some people out. I wanted to see the great white sharks and see how big the biggest one is. That's all. Today I caught 3 great white sharks, but I let them go after taking a look. This can be proven by the video camera on my ship. Shaking his head helplessly, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to Toby with a speechless face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Toby was also a little confused. His sixth sense told him that Jiang Hai might be true. After all, he knows Jiang Hai's ship. If he just came to steal shark fin and tuna, he shouldn't be able to afford such a ship. Okay. What do you want to eat tonight? In fact, this matter has nothing to do with him. So he just smiled indifferently and asked Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also looked at Belle and Harris. I want to eat meat. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, Belle Lester was the first to speak. I want to eat cod. Hearing Belle speak, Harriman Fell smiled and said with a muffled voice. According to the former secretary, Harriman Fells didn't have a good life when he was young. He often freeloaded food from other families in the town. Compared to beef, frozen cod was cheap and delicious, so he preferred fish to beef. I want to eat shrimp. Tell Uncle George to do as he sees fit. After thinking for a moment, Jiang Hai said to old Toby. Hearing that Jiang Hai and the others finished ordering, old Toby walked to the kitchen and told old George about Jiang Hai's request. Then, the kitchen began to get busy again. Not long after, dishes were served, and Jiang Hai and the others had a good meal. After dinner, the 3 went back to sleep. Tonight, they didn't need to deliver food to Edward Anderson and the others. This was because they ate on the ship. Compared to Belle and Harriman Fells, Edward Anderson was a good cook. After all, he lived alone for so long, and he often went to sea in the past. Therefore, it was inevitable that he had good skills. When Jiang Hai and the others got off the ship, he was almost done. The salmon was made into sashimi and fried. With Edward Anderson around, Jiang Hai didn't have to worry about them going hungry. The next morning, after Jiang Hai and the others had breakfast, they went to sea again. This time, they sailed to the southernmost part of Jiang Hai's fishing farm. Great white sharks weren't stupid. Although the overflowing spiritual energy in the fish farm made them drool, they preferred to live in warmer waters. Although Massachusetts and New York were close to each other, New York was warmer than Massachusetts. Therefore, great white sharks usually lived in this area. At least, Edward Anderson was very clear about this. The ship arrived here at noon. Jiang Hai and the others had a simple meal of fish noodle soup, and then they started to work. Fishermen on the sea liked eating noodle soup very much. Firstly, it was convenient, and secondly, it tasted good. Although it was stewed messily, it warmed the body up after eating it. In addition, it also replenished the body with enough water. The seafood was freshly caught. As long as there were enough ingredients, the taste wouldn't be bad. Most importantly, there were many vegetables in it. The scariest disease on an ocean voyage was scurvy, which was caused by eating less fruits and vegetables. If you want to eat vegetables alone, you have to stir-fry them. Most importantly, there are very few people who like to eat them. Americans are carnivores. Under such circumstances, putting them in a pot of stew is a good choice. Jiang Hai has suffered before, so he can be said to be a super loser. He likes to eat the best beef. He also likes to eat this thing. He also likes to eat it. After watching the ship sail to the place, Edward Anderson said to Jiang Hai, "Boss, let's get started. Drive a little bit further. We'll do it after we reach our territory." Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said to Edward Anderson. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts. He didn't understand why Jiang Hai wanted to sail to his territory, but it didn't matter. It wasn't too far away, so he quickly turned the steering wheel and entered Jiang Hai's territory. As soon as he entered, the radio over there rang. "Attention, attention, you are now entering private waters. Please report your identity, otherwise, we will expel you." Hearing the voice on the radio, Edward Anderson couldn't help but smile and pull up the radio. "Tommy, you bastard, look carefully, this is the boss ship. It's us." Pressing the button, Edward Anderson shouted loudly, and hearing Edward Anderson's words, Tommy Charles on the other side also dragged his voice awkwardly. "Well, I said I didn't wake up just now. I don't know if the boss will believe me." Hearing Tommy Charles's words, the people on the ship laughed. After chatting for a while, they began to fish for sharks. Because of yesterday's success, they didn't have anything to worry about this year. They put down the fresh beef, innards, and waited for the shark to come up. Soon, a nearly 5-meter-long great white shark took the bait. Compared to the 4-meter-long ones they caught yesterday, this guy was much more difficult to deal with. This guy kept circling around Jiang Hai's boat, trying to pull off the hook, jumping up and down, flipping back and forth. This fish tossed and turned for nearly an hour before it stopped. Then it was pulled to the side of the boat. After Jiang Hai touched it, he threw it back into the sea. The great white shark that entered the water rested for about 5 minutes under the water, then plunged into Jiang Hai's fishing ground. But if it was before yesterday, it would have eaten a lot of food when it entered the fishing ground. But this time, it lived peacefully with most of the fish. Unless the fish happened to block its path, it would eat it, otherwise, it wouldn't take the initiative to hunt. In the distance, the silly couple and the dolphins were also moving forward. But in the same way, after these Marines saw this guy, they didn't pay attention to him and let him enter the hinterland. After entering the hinterland, this big guy converged with the great white shark 3 days ago. After these 4 sharks converged, they began to patrol in the opposite direction of Jiang Hai's ship. If they encounter a fish, they will eat it. If they don't, they will continue to swim. If there's some large fish outside the range of the fishing ground, they will rush over and bite it. Then, they will drive most of the fish into Jiang Hai's fishing ground, and a small part of the fish will naturally enter their stomach. When this shark began to patrol, Jiang Hai waited for more than half an hour before the next shark was hooked, but unfortunately, this shark was a tiger shark. Jiang Hai thought for a moment. After pulling the shark over, he was ready to release it, but before releasing it, he must take out the hook, otherwise, the shark will be infected. However, Just as Jiang Hai and the others tired the shark and turned it over, 3 boats quickly rushed over. "This is the Coastal Patrol. The boats in front. Please stop all movements and accept the investigation." Before they arrived, the loudspeaker and radio sounded together. Looking at the 3 boats rushing over, Edward Anderson glanced at Jiang Hai, then quietly gave Jiang Hai a thumbs up. He was also thinking, how did Jiang Hai know that these guys will come over? Looking at these guys, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seems that his guess was indeed correct. Just as Jiang Hai and the others put down the work in their hands, the 3 boats also approached. Jiang Hai knew 2 of the boats. One was the Coastal Patrol. Jiang Hai often dealt with them, and their relationship was good. One of the boats belonged to the Fishery Administration, which was responsible for managing individual fishermen. The other boat was filled with ordinary people. They wore ordinary clothes, but there was a black mark on the right side of their necks. Chapter 976. After these people got off the boat, they directly boarded Jiang Hai's yacht. While walking here, they kept taking photos, including Jiang Hai's group, who were stroking sharks. Seeing them taking photos there, Jiang Hai was a little unhappy and frowned. As soon as he frowned, Conelson Peters, who was behind him, stood up at once. Seeing Conelson Peters coming over, the person who was taking photos was still pressing the shutter. Conelson Peters directly snatched the camera away. You, what are you doing? We have the permission to shoot and the right to know. Only you're allowed to do it, but we're not allowed to expose it?" Looking at his camera being taken away, the people here shouted loudly, but Conelson Peters ignored him. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to rush over. Instead, he directly handed the camera to Jiang Hai. "You have the permission to shoot? I don't remember giving you such a privilege." After taking the SLR camera, Jiang Hai directly took out the memory card from it. Then in front of them, he crushed it into several pieces and threw it into the sea. You, don't you care?" Looking at Jiang Hai throwing his work into the sea, this person's face turned green. One must know that in the memory card, there were not only the photos taken just now, there were a lot of other things. These people were from the World Animal Protection Association. Looking at the black label on their mouth, they knew that there were English animals written on it. However, the World Animal Protection Association was not a very official organization. Although the head was official, most of the people who joined were people who originally had their own jobs, either to pick up girls, or really like animals, or for other reasons they joined here. For example, this guy used to be a cameraman. His main job was to take pictures of young models, and so on. There were many of his masterpieces in the memory card. Now he was finished. But looking at the size of Jiang Hai and Conelson Peters, he didn't dare to come over to pick a fight. He could only look at the Coastal Patrol and shout at them. But the Coastal Patrol looked at Jiang Hai at this time, a little embarrassed. "Mr. Jiang, is this your boat?" Hearing Jiang Hai's gaze, the people on his side couldn't just stand there. After hesitating for a moment, the captain of the team came over and said to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face, "It's mine. I remember I registered it." Hearing the captain's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Jiang Hai was deeply influenced by his country. Although it was said that in the United States, the rich were the father, Jiang Hai was still very used to having a good relationship with officials, especially these violent institutions. Therefore, he couldn't say that he bribed the Winthrop Police Department, the Boston Police Department, and the Massachusetts Police Department, including the Coastal Patrol. He could only say that he donated a lot of money to them. Among them, Jiang Hai donated a total of $12 million to the Winthrop Police Department in 3 years. It could be said that the Winthrop Police Department had everything from people to horses to weapons, and ammunition had Jiang Hai's money on it, as well as Jiang Hai's taxes. Therefore, the Winthrop Police Department was similar to Jiang Hai's servants. In Boston, Jiang Hai donated $3 million, and Massachusetts donated $8 million. This was a small amount of money for Jiang Hai, but it also made the police look at Jiang Hai with 2 million points of respect. In Massachusetts, in a simple police agency, Jiang Hai's fart might be more effective than the governor's. This was American politics. It It was the same for the Coastal Patrol. In order to ensure the safety of his coastal area, Jiang Hai donated $6 million to the Coastal Patrol in 3 years, including 10 helicopters and 5 fast boats. The boat just now seemed to have been donated by Jiang Hai. When they saw Jiang Hai, they couldn't do anything other than laugh dryly. Now that they heard Jiang Hai's question, they couldn't do anything other than smile. Looking at their appearance, the other 2 groups knew that they couldn't rely on these guys. Jiang Hai was truly their parent. When they saw Jiang Hai, they couldn't do anything other than laugh dryly. Now that they heard Jiang Hai's question, they couldn't do anything but smile. Cut the crap. Who allowed you to fish here? How dare you fish for sharks? Someone reported you for illegal fishing and fishing for shark fins. Take out your fishing permits and search inside. If you find shark fins, detain this boat. Seeing that the Coastal Patrol was unreliable, the people from the Environmental Protection Agency looked at the people from the Fishery Administration. It turned out that the people from the Fishery Administration were really awesome. Seeing that the Coastal Patrol didn't stand up for them, one of the people from the Fishery Administration stepped forward and said arrogantly, "Search the boat. Let's see who dares." As soon as this person finished speaking, many people prepared to search the boat. However, Harriman Fells and Knerson Peters were not to be trifled with. They stood up instantly and blocked these people. These people looked at the 2 iron towers in front of them and unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, they looked at the Coastal Patrol. The people from the Fishery Administration were also equipped with guns, but now that the Coastal Patrol was present, they didn't dare to take them out. "Hey, let them search. It's like we're really fishing for shark fins. Let them search." Take out our fishing permits. Seeing that they were ready to fight, Jiang Hai smiled and asked the 2 people to continue holding down the sharks. Then, he walked in front of these people and motioned to Edward Anderson to take out the fishing permits. "Oomph, at least you know how powerful we are. Search for me." Seeing that Jiang Hai gave in, this person also shouted loudly, "Search, it doesn't matter. You can even smash this boat, but I have to make it clear first. Do you see those floating boats over there?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Then, he pointed to the floating boats in the distance and said to these people in front of him. Looking at the floating boats that Jiang Hai pointed to, these people also looked over. The guy from the Fishery Administration, who was the leader, felt his heart skip a beat. "See, let me tell you, the area circled by the buoy is my fishing ground. That is to say, where you are now is within the scope of my fishing ground. According to the laws of the United States, this ocean is mine." Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai continued to say with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person felt his heart beat twice for no reason. The United States was indeed particular. Fishing required a fishing permit, but there were exceptions. If the river or the sea belonged to someone else, then it was his property. He could do whatever he wanted with it. It was like someone bought a house in Huaxia and then made bread and dumplings in his home. As a result, the government came. Why did he have to make dumplings? What about the New Year? Who allowed him to make dumplings? Was it inexplicable? Not to mention that Jiang Hai was fishing here. Even if he caught all the fish here, it had nothing to do with them because this was Jiang Hai's. I'm a reasonable person. I'm a very reasonable person. You've entered my fishing grounds without a search warrant. You'll definitely lose your job and lose your job. I'll definitely sue you until you lose your job. Now, let's see if you can find the shark's fin that you're talking about. If you can find it, you'll just lose your job because this sea belongs to me. If you can't find it, then you're framing me. Let's not talk about other things, but you'll definitely have to go to jail. Looking at the people from the Fishery Administration, whose faces were already quite ugly, Jiang Hai continued to say with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person's legs went soft. He knew that he was finished. He looked at the 2 groups of people behind him for help. The Coastal Patrol team naturally pretended not to see it. Now, even if Jiang Hai asked them to testify, they would testify for Jiang Hai. These people from the Fishery Administration had nothing to do with them. As for the people from the Animal Protection Association, many of them took a step back. Now, these people were cursing in their hearts. What the hell? What the hell was this? How did this place become someone else's? This person was fishing in his own home. Even if there were poisonous fish, it had nothing to do with them. This time, they even brought people from the Fishery Administration and the Coastal Patrol team. This time, they had completely offended these people. We are not from the Fishery Administration. You can't threaten us. You are a murderer. Whether you find shark's fin here today or not, you will be condemned by your conscience. Don't tell me you don't know that 8 killer whales died here a few days ago. Just when this person from the Fishery Administration was completely disheartened, a person from the Animal Protection Association stood up and said in a sharp voice. Hearing this person's voice, Jiang Hai also looked at this person. This person was a woman who looked young, because she was very short, about 5 meters tall. She was dressed like a junior high school student. Looking at this girl, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows, then looked at his subordinates and laughed. Little kid, you have to understand one thing. You're standing on my territory now. Don't say that you have a bad conscience. What you're doing now is trespassing. Do you know what happened the last time someone trespassed on my territory? He was sunk to feed the fish. Looking at the girl in front of him, Jiang Hai grinned and said to the girl with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a trace of fear flashed in the girl's eyes, but she soon stood firm. You are lawless. You will be condemned by your conscience, you villain. Facing Jiang Hai, the girl spurted. Listening to her words, Jiang Hai picked his ears. It was inexplicable. He could only say these words now, because it was really inexplicable. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai decided to ignore this guy. At this moment, those people who went in to search came out. Unfortunately, they didn't find any shark's fin. Instead, they found some fish that Edward Anderson had just caught. They didn't know what Jiang Hai said to their leader after they went in. In their view, it was inevitable to take something from Jiang Hai, because it was also called evidence. But as soon as they came out, they found that the atmosphere seemed to be a bit strange. Oh, another charge. It seems that you have to live in there for 3 to 5 years. Looking at the fish in their hands, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. These guys really cooperated with him. Chapter 977. What are you doing? Were you holding your hands? Hearing Jiang Hai's words and looking at the things in his hands, the man from the Administration of Fishery was about to go crazy. He roared loudly. His subordinates were also a little confused. Boss, isn't this evidence? After hearing his words, an old man who might be on good terms with him followed him with some doubts. They used to do this every time. Evidence my ass. I asked you to look for shark's fins. Where are the shark's fins? This is his own fishing ground. What does it have to do with you what he wants to catch? Why do you care what kind of fish he has in his boat? If you want to die, don't drag me down with you. Looking at his subordinates, Yu Zheng's veins bulged as he roared loudly. Hearing his roar, most of his subordinates were in a daze. However, some of them were quick-witted. Their hearts instantly thumped as they exclaimed, "We're finished." They had never expected that this fishing ground belonged to Jiang Hai, so everything here belonged to Jiang Hai. Not to mention that they didn't find any shark's fins. Even if they did, it would be useless because the shark also belonged to Jiang Hai. This led to a very awkward situation. They went to other people's territory, checked their fishing permit, and then took away some fish, saying that this was evidence? Ha! At the thought of this, the subordinates who were searching the fishing ground almost slapped their own mouths. What was this? Did they kick an iron plate? No, this time they directly kicked an iron plate, and their bones were fractured. You don't have to scream so miserably. You have to check your fishing permit when you enter private property. Dereliction of duty. You will lose your job by 1,000,000%. You framed me, stole my fish, framed me, and stole. You may have heard that my lawyer is called Moses Adams. He's a good lawyer. With such conclusive evidence, it's quite reasonable for you to be sentenced to 3 to 5 years. Looking at the people from the Administration of Fisheries in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these people from the Administration of Fishery felt a chill in their hearts. They knew that this time they would lose their jobs and have to go to jail. No one doubted Jiang Hai's words because they knew where this place was and they had heard of Jiang Hai. It was just that they didn't think that way at first. Who is Jiang Hai? A billionaire? Why would a billionaire fish for sharks on a boat like a fisherman? But now the situation was that this was Jiang Hai, so they were doomed. Clang! Some people couldn't stand it anymore. They threw down the things in their hands and lay on the ground with a defeated face. Hey, don't, you can't stand it. I didn't say that I would bribe the prisoners in the prison to teach you a lesson. This is just the beginning. I am the most benevolent person. If you are wrong, you have to admit it. If you are beaten, you have to stand up straight. It's that simple. Looking at these people whose faces were as pale as ashes, Jiang Hai shook his head and smiled. Their mental fortitude was too weak. Mr. Jiang, please be merciful. Seeing Jiang Hai scaring these people to death, the head of the coastal patrol team couldn't help but lick his lips, then hesitantly walked over and whispered to Jiang Hai, Mr. Jiang, please be merciful. But before he could finish, Jiang Hai interrupted him directly. Shut up. Who are you talking to now? Are you speaking to me on behalf of your entire coastal patrol team? Looking at this person, if the coastal patrol team didn't say anything, Jiang Hai might not say anything because there would be opportunities to cooperate in the future. But now, he actually dared to plead for mercy. Did he think that he was doing the right thing? Sorry, I was reckless. When this person heard Jiang Hai's words, he immediately retreated. They couldn't even save themselves. How dare they plead for mercy for others? Jiang Hai wouldn't be polite to them. Okay, take the fish away. I have plenty here. Go back and have a good meal. Then, wait for the court summons. It should arrive in a few days. Pay attention to your mailbox. Looking at the people from the Fishery Administration, who looked as if their mother had died, Jiang Hai said casually. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, most of these people's faces turned ashen. Americans didn't have the habit of saving money. Basically, more than 70% of Americans had loans for banks. They had loans for houses, cars, and everything else. In a situation where the economic conditions were not good, the Fishery Administration was a relatively stable job with a good income. Now, Jiang Hai's lips moved, and they lost their jobs and had to go to jail. That meant they were directly bankrupt. Because they didn't have the money to pay off their mortgage, their houses would be taken back by the bank. If they didn't have the money to pay off their car loans, their cars would disappear and they would go to jail. It could be said that it was inevitable that their families would be ruined. Thinking of this, many people felt sad. Looking at Jiang Hai, the person who caused them all these troubles, they wanted to drag Jiang Hai down with them. But looking at the people around him and the coastal patrol, these people swallowed a mouthful of saliva. They knew that they had no way to take revenge. God, it was really unfair. People were like this. It was easy to forgive oneself, but difficult to forgive others. Although Jiang Hai couldn't be said to have a heart of stone, these guys came to find trouble with him, so he definitely wouldn't be lenient. Looking at these people's behavior, he knew that these guys had done this kind of thing before. Now that Jiang Hai had dealt with them, he wouldn't be the least bit lenient. If it wasn't Jiang Hai today, but some ordinary people, they could only suffer in silence. Their things would be confiscated, they would be fined, and they would even have to go to jail for a while. At that time, it would be Jiang Hai whose family was ruined. Therefore, Jiang Hai would definitely not be polite to these people. Are you done? If you are, go back and wait for the court summons. Get out of here. Seeing these people come out, Jiang Hai's face darkened, and he said with a gloomy face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, whether it was the people from the Administration of Fishery, the people from the Environmental Protection Organization, or the Coastal Patrol, they all got on their boats and fled. They had no choice, they had to escape, because the next moment, Jiang Hai might even sue them. However, among the crowd of people who ran away like stray dogs, the little girl who just shouted at Jiang Hai didn't show any fear. She still frowned and glared at Jiang Hai, but it was useless to be alone. Soon, she was carried on a boat, and then the three boats drove away quickly. Seeing the boats leave, Jiang Hai took out his phone and called Moses Adams. He was a man of his words. If he said that he would ruin their family, he would ruin their family. He was so annoying. Boss, what should we do with this guy? Seeing that everyone had left, Edward Anderson, who just came out, removed the hook from the tiger shark's mouth, pointed at the big guy, and asked Jiang Hai, Let it go. Jiang Hai, who didn't intend to catch the tiger shark, waved his hand. Then everyone turned this guy over. If they let it go directly now, this guy would sink to the bottom of the water and die. So Edward Anderson deliberately let the tiger shark rest here for a while. When its eyes began to blink and its body began to become stronger, they put it down. As soon as it entered the water, the tiger shark directly plunged into Jiang Hai's fishing ground. But in less than 5 minutes, it ran out at a faster speed. What a joke! The idiot's patrol team was here. Come on, let's continue. Looking at the tiger shark disappearing under the water, Jiang Hai also smiled. What happened just now was a disaster for those people, but for Jiang Hai, it was just a small accident. After taking a break, they continued to catch the great white shark. While Jiang Hai continued to catch the great white shark, the 3 teams on the other side were also divided. Except for the people of the fishery administration who were now like walking corpses, the people of the coastal patrol team were extremely angry. You guys, what kind of information did you provide? They're catching fish in their own fishing ground. It's none of your business. Are you crazy? How dare you go to other people's fishing ground and tell them what to do? The captain of the coastal patrol team, who was scolded by Jiang Hai to the point that he didn't even dare to fart, also scolded the people of the Environmental Protection Organization. These people had no other choice but to lower their heads and look at him awkwardly. Although the Environmental Protection Organization was very arrogant and organized demonstrations all day long to oppose this and that, when it came to private property, how could they oppose it? After all, not everyone was like Hua Xia's dog fans. Even if it was a dog bought by others, they would still dare to rush over, block cars, and release the dog. These people had nothing better to do. At least these people still had some awareness of the law. They knew that this was not right. So now it was very embarrassing. Don't shout there. If you shout, it only shows that you have a guilty conscience. You clearly saw Jiang Hai catching marine creatures, but you didn't dare to catch them. Do people like you deserve the national emblem of Shunko? But just when everyone was silent, the little girl appeared again, still standing on a moral high ground, scolding the coastal patrol team in front of her. Oh, little girl, next time ask your boss to come out and talk. Also, you'd better go back and study the laws of our country. That fishing ground belongs to Mr. Jiang. He can do whatever he wants there, and no one can stop him. You and I are guaranteed. Looking at the girl in front of him, the captain of the coastal patrol team said seriously with a gloomy face, You bastard, you are that guy's accomplice. You will all go to hell after you die. Well, as soon as he talked to her about laws and regulations, this guy wisely changed the topic to other things. These little girls are so unreasonable. Chapter 978. Be careful next time. If you cause me trouble again, I'll lock you up for 48 hours. Don't doubt my ability. Ignoring the girl who started to quarrel, it was obvious that she couldn't win the argument and started to play tricks. The coastal patrol officer pointed at the adults on the other side and said loudly before leaving with his men. The people from the Environmental Protection Association sighed as they watched them leave. Who was the one who provided the information this time? Isn't he setting us up? After the outsiders left, one of the people who were driving the boat complained unhappily. Actually, they wouldn't be able to take it if someone pointed at them and scolded them for a long time, let alone when they couldn't talk back. This time, not only did they cause trouble for themselves, but they also made the people from the Department of Fisheries the scapegoat. Thinking about it made them feel a little guilty. Humans were like that. Under such circumstances, they would start looking for excuses. In any case, the fault wasn't with them. There were too few people in this world who would reflect on themselves. They preferred to push the blame of their wrongdoings onto others. Now, these people were pushing the blame onto the person who provided the information. I didn't expect this guy to be Jiang Hai. The person who got the news also sighed a little awkwardly at this time and whispered in a low voice. Indeed, he also has a source of information. The source of the information was the small town where Jiang Hai and the others lived. Just like old Toby had said yesterday, everyone in the town knew that Jiang Hai and the others were there to catch sharks. Under such circumstances, there were bound to be some people who hated the rich who were unhappy with Jiang Hai. Why would he drive a big yacht? and bring his subordinates to catch sharks. What was he pretending for? At the very least, they were very unhappy with Jiang Hai's behavior. Under such circumstances, some people wanted to make Jiang Hai look bad, such as the people from the Environmental Protection Organization. They didn't care if there was a reward for reporting the information, but they were very happy to see Jiang Hai suffer. However, they didn't expect that Jiang Hai would hear some hidden meaning in old Toby's words. He was different from ordinary Americans and Huaxia people in that he liked to deal with everything in the most pessimistic way. Since he knew that someone knew that he was here to catch sharks, he might as well take precautions. If something really happened, it would be troublesome. Although he wasn't here to get shark fins or anything, he still had to be vigilant. Therefore, when the boat arrived there today, Jiang Hai asked Edward Anderson to sail further in. You must pay attention next time. If you have any information, you have to verify the source of the information. Today's incident can't happen again. Seeing that this person also admitted his mistake, the leader of the Environmental Protection Organization here also said seriously, "Yes, it's my mistake this time. I mistakenly believed those fishermen. I knew that those guys were definitely up to no good." When the person heard the leader's words, he took advantage of the situation and said seriously. Hearing his words, everyone stopped talking. After all, the Environmental Protection Association was not an organization established by the country. They were only together to protect wild animals. Therefore, there wasn't much of a conflict of interest. They also didn't want to offend too many people because of this mistake. We can't just let this go. However, there were some people who didn't think so, such as the girl. Hearing that everyone was going to let this matter slide and no longer look for trouble with Jiang Hai, the girl was not going to do it. Orna, what else do you want? Kevin has already admitted his mistake. Listening to the unforgiving girl, the leader frowned and then said with some dissatisfaction, although this is not an official organization, he also has to be dignified. I'm not talking about Kevin. I'm talking about Jiang Hai. We can't just let this go. We just saw that he caught a tiger shark. It's very likely that after we leave, he will take the tiger shark's fin and then throw its body into the cold sea. Even if we don't have evidence, we all know that 8 killer whales died in his hands. This matter can't just be let go. The girl waved her hand. Originally, she didn't want to find Kevin, the member who called everyone over after getting the information. She was eyeing Jiang Hai. She can't let Jiang Hai escape like this. Yes, in her eyes, Jiang Hai had already broken the law. It was only because he was rich that he escaped the punishment of the law. Now that she was here, she must represent justice, represent the moon, and eliminate Jiang Hai, this malignant tumor. Oh my God, Orna, you know he's a rich man. He's not destined to be punished by the law. Plus, that's his fish farm. He can do whatever he wants. The leader slapped his forehead and said helplessly. To him, this Orna was indeed a troublesome person. Although Orna looked very young and beautiful, she was actually 24 years old this year. She was born with a child's face and a huge face. Cough, it was just a child's face. There was nothing huge on her face. Time rarely left any traces on her face. This was not a disease. It was just that she was relatively young. Plus, she liked to dress up like a young person. She often carried a backpack. From the back, she might look like a high school student, but from the front, she looked like a junior high school student. But don't underestimate this girl. Although she was young, her IQ was quite high. At the age of 24, she already had a doctorate in life sciences from Princeton University. At the same time, she also had a master's degree in economics. According to her, the master's degree in economics was only because she needed to earn money to support herself. As for life sciences, she specialized in animals. This was her favorite field. Maybe it was because she had been in school for too many years that she became stupid. So, at the age of 24, she did not lack money. Secondly, she had a reputation. However, no matter what she did, she took things for granted. If people in China were called dog fans or sheep fans, then she was an animal fan. She resisted any action that killed animals. For this reason, she even became a vegetarian. In the beginning, she even went around persuading her friends to be vegetarian. Her parents also wanted to be vegetarian. She even went to the slaughterhouse to demonstrate. Unfortunately, she was chased away, and her friends became fewer and fewer. Later, she also understood that she could not stop others from eating meat because humans were also part of the environment. If humans really did not eat meat, then the food chain would collapse. So, later on, she did not stop others from eating beef, fish, or anything like that. However, she still loved wild animals. 3 years ago, she joined the Environmental Protection Association. Because she was rich and was a fanatic, she was very popular in the association. A few days ago, after learning that 8 killer whales had died in Jianghai's waters, she took it for granted that they were killed by Jianghai. Now that she heard that Jianghai was killing sharks, she took the initiative to ask for permission to participate in this operation. In the end, she came this time, only to see the darkness of the world. In her eyes, Jianghai had no intention of repenting at all. Instead, he shamelessly took pride in it. Moreover, he used his identity as a rich person to suppress the people from the Administration of Fisheries and the Coastal Patrol. This really pissed off the young lady. She felt that if Jianghai was in front of her, she would eat him up. I'm going to find evidence of his crimes. This is not over. On the boat, Orna said with a righteous face, and the people who were with her helplessly covered their faces. Well, they couldn't control this young lady anymore. Okay, you go find evidence of his crimes. But before that, we have to go back first. This time, the matter is not small. It seems that the president will have to step in. Patting his cheeks, the leader said somewhat speechlessly. He was really tired. No matter how these people from the Environmental Protection Organization went back, Jianghai and the others had a good harvest in the afternoon. They caught 3 more great white sharks. In addition to the 3 from yesterday and the 1 they just released, Jianghai's great white shark navy already had 7. Although there was a big difference in size and age, Jianghai believed that with his aura training, these guys would inevitably grow very big in the future. Big Fool size had basically reached its limit. It was about 12 or 13 meters. It couldn't grow any bigger. However, the sand tiger shark could only grow up to 4 meters, and the great white sharks could grow up to more than 6 meters, or even 7 or 8 meters. Jianghai was still looking forward to seeing how big they could grow with aura. Maybe after a while, Jianghai could raise more than a dozen megalodon sharks. At that time, not to mention killer whales, sperm whales, and humpback whales, even blue whales, Jianghai could command his navy to kill them. After catching 4 sharks today, Jianghai and the others returned to the town. It was only about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they left, but it was almost 9 o'clock when they returned to the town. Jianghai took Edward Anderson back to Toby and George's small hotel and had a good meal. After sending some food to Bell Lester and Harriman Fells, they went to sleep. The night was quiet. The next morning, Jianghai paid for the room. Why? Because if there were no accidents, Jianghai and the others would go back today. They had already caught 7 sharks. Jianghai's goal was 10, but it didn't matter if there were less than 10. It was fine to have 8 or 9. Jianghai didn't believe that he couldn't catch 1 today, so he checked out in advance. They didn't have to come to this gloomy town tonight, but could go home. After checking out and eating breakfast, Jianghai and the others set off again. Chapter 979. Oh, our luck is really good today. It seems that we might be able to go home before the sun rises. Seeing that Jianghai had caught the second great white shark in less than an hour, Bell Lester said with a smile. Hearing his words, although the others didn't say anything, the smile on their faces said it all. After today's work, everyone will have 3 days off. The reward is 10,000 yuan. Seeing that everyone was in high spirits, Jianghai also said. Seeing that Jianghai was so generous, his subordinates became even more excited. Amidst the laughter, the 5-meter-long great white shark was finally exhausted and was pulled to the side of the boat. Jianghai and the others also turned this guy over. After injecting spiritual energy into it, they removed the hook from its mouth and put it back into the water. After a while, when the spiritual energy began to take effect and the fish almost recovered, they put it back into the sea. This is the 9th one. Let's take a break and catch another one. After clapping his hands, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Seeing that it was only 2 o'clock, everyone laughed happily. In fact, Jiang Hai could have just let it go, but since there was still time, it was not a problem to wait a little longer. After resting for about 15 minutes, Edward Anderson rehung the internal organs of the cow and threw them into the sea. In an instant, a large number of fish gathered again. Compared to the number of fish outside of Jiang Hai's fishing ground, there were more fish in Jiang Hai's manor. After Jiang Hai decided to develop his new fishing ground, he began to spread the grass seeds. Of course, it was impossible to spread the grass seeds by boat. Now they had a plane. However, when he was preparing to develop the ocean, he used a boat to spread the grass seeds. It was quite slow, taking a month to spread the grass seeds. But now that he had the helicopter and the At-802F, it was much faster to scatter the seeds. He could just sit on the plane and throw the seeds down when it was flying at a low altitude. Then he could sit on the helicopter and fill in the gaps that he had not scattered. First, he soaked the seeds of the seaweed and seaweed, which was to let them germinate. Of course, while soaking, Jiang Hai had already injected spiritual energy into them. After the seeds sprouted, he directly took the helicopter and threw the grass seeds directly into the sea. These grass seeds contained spiritual energy. After entering the sea, they would take root in the sand, and the survival rate was quite high. Generally speaking, it was good to have a survival rate of more than 60%. After all, it was grass. If it were other things, the survival rate would be less than 20%. However, Jiang Hai's grass seeds had a survival rate of more than 80%. The reason why they didn't survive was because they were eaten by fish. Jiang Hai couldn't do anything about it. Therefore, although it had only been more than a month, the seaweed and seaweed rooted in the sea had begun to play their role. First of all, Jiang Hai's sea water was getting colder and colder, but there were more and more fish. After Jiang Hai and Iron Bull discussed the fish to be raised this year, he had already started to put in the octopus and mullet a few days ago. These little guys would live here for a month, and then they would become food for other fish. Jiang Hai and the others couldn't do anything about these small fish eating the cow's internal organs. They could only continue to wait. If they finished eating, they would put in another piece. After fishing, there would definitely be some bait to feed the fish. However, while they were waiting there, suddenly a black shadow slowly floated up from under the water. There's something. Edward Anderson, who had been paying attention, saw the black shadow and said immediately. He then hid his head in the range of the boat, and at the same time, gestured to the others to keep quiet. It should be. However, after glancing at it, Jiang Hai said with some doubts. His eyesight was much better than Edward Anderson's. These days, he had seen a lot of sharks, such as mackerel sharks, tiger sharks, great blue sharks, and so on. However, the size of these sharks was not the same as the black shadow in front of him. Although this black shadow was also very big, about the same size as an ordinary great white shark, it was much sturdier. Looking at this fish, Jiang Hai scratched his head. His sixth sense told him that this should be a shark, but the color of the fish's back was somewhat similar to that of a shark. This made him a little confused. Just as he was thinking about it, Edward Anderson's expression changed. This is indeed not a shark, it's a black tuna. When he said the last 3 words, Edward Anderson's eyes almost lit up. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was also stunned for a moment. Black tuna? He was definitely not unfamiliar with this kind of fish. If the black tuna didn't understand, then everyone should know about the bluefin golden lance. There were a lot of bluefin golden lance in Jiang Hai's fish farm. Some were chased here by Big Fool, and some came here by themselves because they felt that the spiritual energy here was abundant. Therefore, there was a school of bluefin golden lance in Jiang Hai's fish farm. Jiang Hai didn't carefully count how many there were, but at least there were more than 100 of them, and this was only referring to the bluefin, yellowfin, masu, and so on. Jiang Hai's fish farm was too big, so he had tens of thousands of bluefin golden lance without raising them. Last year, when the weather was still hot, he often went into the water to catch lobsters, abalones, prawns, and so on. He watched the schools of bluefin golden lance eating herring or squid. The ecological balance in Jiang Hai's manor was quite unbalanced. It was completely dependent on his spiritual energy to surround these fish. If one day Jiang Hai's spiritual energy ran out, then his fish farm would be worthless. At that time, he saw a lot of bluefin golden lance in the fish farm. He thought that after a few more years, the number of these little things would be even more. It was precisely because of this that during the fishing exhibition last year, Jiang Hai got 2 bluefin golden lance as decorations and were bought by the islanders. He didn't want to keep them as breeding fish because he didn't lack these things now. Now that he saw a bluefin golden lance, Jiang Hai didn't say anything. If it really took the bait, then he would eat it or sell it, but he couldn't let others know. After all, it was now the fishing season for bluefin golden lance. The bluefin golden lance in the water seemed to have lived for a long time. Although the cow's innards with spiritual energy were very attractive to it, it was still in a state of observation, watching the small fish constantly pecking at the cow's innards in front of it. Seeing that the cow's innards were getting smaller and smaller, but nothing happened, the fish couldn't stay still. Finally, the temptation of the cow's innards exceeded its many years of experience. It opened its big mouth and swallowed the remaining half of the cow's innards in an instant. But as soon as it swallowed it, it knew that it was bad, because the corner of its mouth hurt. Its mouth had been pierced. At this time, Edward Anderson also exerted force and retracted the line. Under the pain, the bluefin golden lance, which was originally going to drill under the sea, swam in a straight line toward the distance. However, Edward Anderson and the others were not to be trifled with. They let it swim, but they controlled the direction it swam in. It couldn't let go of the line if it swam straight, so it could only swim in circles. Under its struggle, its physical strength was quickly drained, and Edward Anderson also looked at it with a smile while constantly controlling the line in his hand. Finally, the fish couldn't take it anymore. After struggling for about half an hour, it helplessly listened to Edward Anderson's instructions and was pulled to the side of the boat. When it was pulled over, the people on the boat snorted. This guy was really a huge monster. The whole fish looked no smaller than a great white shark. The whole body didn't look carefully, but it was almost 5 meters long. The dark blue back made Jiang Hai and the others' faces almost cramp with laughter. "Get up quickly!" Seeing that the big guy was no longer swimming, Edward Anderson also said loudly. Tunas were the same as some sharks. They needed to keep swimming to breathe. If they didn't move, they wouldn't breathe and they would suffocate. The blood of the dead tunas would flow into their meat, so the fish wouldn't taste good. Edward Anderson was an expert. Although the others didn't know much about this, it wasn't a problem for them to follow orders. Harriman Fells immediately picked up the hook and hooked it onto the fish's body. Then he lifted it up. As mentioned before, Harriman Fells was born with great strength, but even so, he couldn't lift it. Seeing that his friend couldn't stand it anymore, Knurse and Peters reached out to help, but the two of them couldn't lift the fish up. Seeing this, Jiang Hai had to step in. He walked directly to the hook and lifted it with his right hand. He was also a little surprised. The fish was really heavy, but it was far from the weight that Jiang Hai couldn't bear. Using his right arm, Jiang Hai directly lifted the fish up and threw it on the boat. Edward Anderson immediately pulled up the fish's tail with a lasso, then hung the whole fish upside down. After that, he killed the fish and let out the blood. After everything was done, Edward Anderson began to measure. But when the measurement was over, he couldn't help but take a deep breath because this guy was really terrifying. "What's the data?" Seeing that Edward Anderson was a little stunned, Jiang Hai also came over and asked. When Edward Anderson showed the data to Jiang Hai was also a little stunned and looked at him in disbelief. "Boss, what should we do?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson asked Jiang Hai with some hesitation. "Do you still need to ask?" "Sell it." But Jiang Hai slapped his thigh. "If we don't sell it, what's the point of keeping it?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.